4 years ago, in February 2018, President Cyril Ramaphosa quoted the words of the famous renewal song by the legendary Brayu Masekela. And he said these words in his inaugural State of the Nation speech. I want to be there when the people start to turn it around, when they triumph over poverty. I want to lend a hand, send me. Hello, Sanibonani, Sawubona, Dumelang, Goeiemiddag. My name is Adjournment, the Editor-in-Chief of News24, and we are coming to you live from the Media24 headquarters in Cape Town's foreshore on this quite warm Cape Town afternoon, and we're going to try to make it even hotter before 7 o'clock when President Ramaphosa delivers his sixth, can you believe it, sixth State of the Nation address since being inaugurated as South African President in that historic moment in February 2018. This is an interesting year for the President. He's got an ANC election coming up in December, and I will ask my colleagues and fellow panelists tonight to share with you, our readers and viewers, their thoughts on whether this will strengthen or hamstring the President in his speech tonight. Tonight, I'm joined by News24's political editor, Quinita Hunter. Quinita, welcome to Cape Town. It's always nice to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here, and also very different that we're not sitting outside the National Assembly, but still very exciting to be here.
Of course. And then for the first time, very excitingly, Carol Payton, our new Fin24 writer at large. Carol, welcome on the News24 set.
Thanks, Aryan. Very pleased to be here.
Quinita, you have mentioned that this is a strange SONA. And of course, this is strange for a number of reasons. We are not at Parliament not only because of COVID, but because of a gutting fire that destroyed Parliament in, I think it was the 2nd of January this year. Tell us about SONA this year. How is it different? What will it look like? Where is it being held? And how are we as journalists covering it differently this year?
Yeah, so for the first time, the opening of Parliament is not taking place at Parliament. And that's, like you said, was this fire that gutted the National Assembly and has made the entire parliamentary precinct completely unsafe. Obviously, the Speaker of the National Assembly had to, try to find a venue to host the President's State of the Nation address, which is obviously a joint sitting between the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. They then took the city of Cape Town up on their offer to have it at the City Hall. So that's where the President is going to stand this evening at 7 p.m. to deliver his address. Obviously, in terms of space, the City Hall is much smaller than the National Assembly. So they had to sort of decide how many MPs actually make it in person and how many will be joining via Zoom. So as well, there's going to be the hybrid element of this year's speech, which is quite fascinating. And there's about 300 or so MPs and members of the NCOP that would be in the House. And then that also scaled down on the media contingent as well this year because of COVID-19, but like you said, also because that it's taking place in a whole new venue. So historic on many accounts already before the President even speaks. This year, there isn't that much of pomp and ceremony that we're used to, compounded by COVID-19, but more than that, it's quite somber. It is historical that the House of Parliament was burnt down.
I mean, that was a devastating day for our democracy, the building of many years old, and we still don't know what exactly happened. We have Zandile Mafe on trial for alleged arson and I think treason, but there's a lot of things in that case that don't yet add up. We're not here tonight to discuss that, but just to say, I mean, our reporters have uncovered some of the detail through the CCTV, for example, seeing how Mafe walked around for hours and hours looking for newspapers and pieces of cloth. He had a can of petrol with him to set Parliament alight. He was also on his cell phone, as our investigative reporters reported a few weekends ago. And it'll be interesting to see what comes of that case. A lot of conspiracy theories. As journalists, we shouldn't believe in them unless there's fact, to substantiate them. But it's a story we will be following closely.
Absolutely. And Speaker Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula saying to the media this week that the reason why it was so important for them to have an in-person element of the State of the Nation address is to make that political statement that the work of Parliament will not be interrupted despite, what people are claiming to be sabotage in relation to that. that fire. And so that's why, there was this very strong undertaking by the leaders of Parliament to say that there has to be an event. It can't be the president sitting from his office delivering a speech like he does, any other day. And one can argue to say, whether given the broader mood in the country, whether we need the pomp and ceremony at all. But that's what we're going to see a little bit of this evening.
Do we know yet whether the MPs who are on Zoom are also dressing up?
Hopefully not in their pajamas.
And hopefully they'll be on mute. Carol, this devastating fire of Parliament has opened up that old debate again about whether Parliament should be in Cape Town. I mean, do you think anything will come of that this time, or do you think it will just be Parliament will be fixed and next year we'll be back there?
No, I think so much has changed with COVID, so that so much more is virtual, and I think that much more of Parliament will be virtual, because it was enormously expensive, obviously, for not just for MPs to move up and down, but for officials to, large contingents of officials to be down there for 20 meetings a week. So so a lot has changed. So I don't think it'll ever be the same again. But I do hope they rebuild Parliament because of its history and because it's meaningful. It's got a meaning for it. So to have to build a completely new building, well, not only would it cost more, but also I think just wouldn't be the same. So I do hope they keep it, and we manage to still have our ceremonial activities there.
And of course, the Cape Town tourism will take a big knock if Parliament ever were to move from the mother city. Carol, I want to ask you, I mean, I started with the quotes of Tumamina, the Yumasekela song. And can you believe it's been 4 years, since that day, that night, we were all there, and I think we were all kind of looking forward to this Ramaphosa presidency, lots of hope, leaving behind the state-captured lost decade and Jacob Zuma. And here we are, 4 years later, going into Ramaphosa's final year as ANC president of his first term.
Yeah. Do you remember the word Ramaphoria? I mean, there was Ramaphoria. We don't talk about Ramaphoria anymore. So yeah, the 4 years has gone quickly. I think the pandemic sort of ate 2 years of the 4 years, unfortunately. But that said, it is 4 years now that Ramaphosa's been president, and he's time. The clock is ticking, and it's very, very clear from what we saw in the election, what we saw in July. It's very clear people are running out of patience. So he hasn't got as much time as maybe he thinks he has. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot, and the mood, as Kanita's saying, the mood in the country is not a positive one at the moment.
So that triumph over poverty hasn't yet happened, quite yet, and the tide has not been turned, I guess, to the extent that he wanted it to when he quoted Yumasekela in 2018. Kanita, is there some significance tonight about Ramaphosa delivering the State of the Nation speech? I know we've discussed why we're at City Hall, Cape Town, but 32 years ago, that is exactly where former President Nelson Mandela stood, delivering his first public address after being released from Victor Verster prison. And once Cyril Ramaphosa held the mic for him. Do you think there's going to be some mention of that tonight?
Yeah, I think that it's symbolic in that way that the sort of prodigal son of Mandela and sort of of what Cyril Ramaphosa was to Mandela at the time, versus all of these years later, almost 3 decades later, or more than 3 decades later, he's returning to that spot, and I think there's going to be some moment made out of it. Like I said, whichever way it goes, it is historic in many ways. But I think it's also a moment to stand back and reflect on the ideals that Mandela punted those many years ago versus where we are as a country today. And I think there has to be that self-introspection, if not for the Ramaphosa administration, but also for the larger ANC, to juxtapose where we are and where we thought we would be, at least. And I think that would be perhaps a good starting point for the president, to almost concede that we are not where we meant to be at least. And I mean, sometimes we look at things very myopically from within this 4 years, but if you just have to look holistically, over the course of democracy, has things gotten better? And one can argue that it has, but at the same time, how has this 4 years slowed down growth or made further achievements. And so I think that needs to happen. There needs to be this honest reflection. And if you ask me, one word that I would want the president's address to be tonight, and that would be just honest. And I think that would be a good juxtaposition to say we had this great ideal for South Africa as the ANC and as forces fighting for the liberation of this country. But 32 years later, I mean, there's this theme that has been in the country since the unrest and since like you said, the burning of Parliament, the undermining of democratic gains. And that's something the president has spoken about in ANC circles and ANC events, but he's probably going to have to reflect on this today because of just the circumstances in which he's giving the address. There is this undercurrent that exists, that there is it's unnamed in many ways, but there's this effort to call it an undermining of the democratic gains, or the stability of the state is being under attack. And that kind of that theme is very important, because again, you can't ignore it given the fact that you're not sitting at or standing at the podium where you would have normally given your address, but more importantly that you've seen all of these frankly bizarre events happening across the country, across different spaces, and there's this helplessness of yes, we are under attack, but there isn't a breakdown of why, who, what would be the motive,
yes.
And then let alone a real tangible kind of plan in relation to that. And so I think that we have to take the moment to talk about the state of our democracy and the health of our democracy. And I think that that's why tonight is an important moment, if not the president to reflect on it, but we, watching him today, need to have that in the back of our minds.
Also, a few weeks after one of his own cabinet ministers, Lindiwe Sisulu, she's now, I think, the Minister of Tourism, she's jumped around so much, but after she said the Constitution is a problem, this Constitution is no longer working for us, it's not benefiting the people, the African people that it should, the African majority, and that the problem lies with that document. So the Constitution and the being of the Constitution certainly under scrutiny and under criticism by at least a faction in the ANC. She's definitely not alone.
Yeah, and also, like, you can go as far as saying under attack, and that's the thing about why we can't ignore these attacks and the vitriol that's spewed out by certain quarters in the ANC, particularly because it has some spillover in society. If you have the undermining of democracy, you saw it in the Zuma years, where you had the disregard of the rule of law, and then it became sort of endemic. And now if you have this attack on the Constitution, what do we have as South Africa if we don't have the Constitution?
Yeah.
Because everything else seems to be failing and falling apart. And the one thing that we could hold on to is the constitutional order. And I think that tonight is a good reminder, it needs to be a good reminder, that the constitutional order in South Africa is still alive despite the attacks.
Carol, do you foresee the president standing up tonight in fierce defense of the Constitution and of the Constitutional Court and of our democracy and the pillars of our democracy?
I hope so, and I think he will, and I think people want and need that. But I also think that more than that, people want actual change. They want to see change in their lives, and that's really the challenge to him. So from that point of view, we've also got to scrutinize, like, well, what is going to make this year different? Why is year 5 going to be different to year 4? Because, we've seen how Ramaphosa's administration really struggles to deliver. It really struggles to take decisions. It struggles to implement things. It struggles to do things. It takes inordinately wrong. So what is he going to do about that? I mean, last year he did promise us, that they are on their way to professionalizing the public service. But if I don't think there's been any improvement in the quality of public service. So is that still the plan? Is he still, as he said at the State Capture Commission, still believes that ANC deployment is a harmless practice? So yeah, I think we need to hear that from him. And I think also, you know, the market does watch the speech quite closely. So he has to speak to many different people, all at the same time. So and that's not easy. That's not an easy thing to do. So he has to make sure he's got a message for everybody.
Gunita, we sometimes forget that Cyril Ramaphosa is also a politician, and he's the leader of a political party that needs to win elections for him to be in power. This political party, called the ANC, is going into an electoral conference in December. We don't know yet where. We think Gauteng. I don't know if that's been confirmed.
Not confirmed, but
not confirmed yet.
So.
And I mean, this president, technically, I think you and I agree that it's very unlikely, but technically, this could be his last year as ANC president. We could have a new ANC leader from mid-December. How will this impact this presidential race? And we've already seen, I mean, I think almost from the 1st of January, we've heard about Lindiwe Sisulu maybe taking on Ramaphosa. We've heard that now it's actually the other 5 positions in the top 6 that the juggling is up to. We're seeing people positioning themselves. We've heard names, Ronald Lamola, Gwede Mantashe, Paul Mashatile, and others. Sihle Zikalala wants to come into the top 6. Is this going to take an inordinate amount of his time and energy this year? Is he going to have to look over his shoulder while he's supposed to do these very important things in the economy and the rule of law and security apparatus? Is he going to have to also, or primarily even, look over his shoulder, make sure that he's got his foot soldiers in the provinces, that he's got the votes, that he's got the buses of delegates coming, the hotels, to let them not be intimidated by the RET faction as we saw at Nasrec?
I think that he's always had to do that, right? So from the time he became president, he always had to have this duality between, you know, his position in the party and his position in the state. And it's difficult to say, you know, which one he was better at, because the ANC is not in a very good shape as is the country at the moment. But I think, yes, it brings, you know, a new set of challenges, and it also creates some sort of limitations in you know, how bold he could be, because just think about when he took over office, with the amount of optimism, euphoria, Carol said Ramaphosa, that existed at the time, and just, you know, good public sentiment, and just the support from civil society in so many quarters of society, and he you know, it only led to that much of action. Now, when there is this sort of constraint, and you know, just in terms of the economy and what COVID-19 has brought, and then more so in terms of the party sort of cannibalizing itself, it becomes very difficult then to make this year the year of, you know, breaking out of this sort of you know, shell that he had created for himself. And so I always say, you know, we have to believe people when they show us who they are, right? And President Ramaphosa has shown us who he really is in this last 4 years, in the sense that he is a consensus builder. He prefers dialogue over action, and he will kick the can down the road if it means not taking a difficult decision. And he's shown us over and over again. Let's take a bet, Adrian, that he's going to talk about something called the social compact. There's going to be some social compact at the end of the speech. You're going to buy me a drink out of it if he doesn't.
I disagree with you.
But this, I mean, that's his style, right? And so a man who tries to avert conflict, who tries to maneuver around it, who tries to get the best possible outcome with the least amount of conflict. And so you have that against a year where there is this instability within the ANC, and as is you know, normal and traditional in relation to elective conferences and intra-party elections. And so now the important thing is that he just has to do. He doesn't have the public goodwill, and like Carol said, people are getting tired.
Yeah,
so
he has,
so now his words are not and not enough for in terms of the public discourse. And so now, yes, you have all of the shenanigans in the ANC, but you don't have the benefit of the doubt that you received 4 years ago. And that's the thing. 4 years ago, there was this, the sense of, oh, shame, he has so much to do and so much to fix. And he also has this party that's holding him hamstrung. And now in this 4 years, there's sort of this kind of, this realization that we can't separate Ramaphosa from the ANC, and that's what we did. I'm saying we as broadly as society in terms of giving him that benefit of the doubt, and I suppose people were very hungry for hope. We did reach rock bottom in the Zuma years, and there was this general sense that there can only be one way, and that would be up, And so now what you have is is people who are watching tonight don't have the level of patience that they probably had 3 years ago even.
Carol, you've quoted in your piece this week the Afrobarometer that says the trust in Ramaphosa and the ANC has gone down. There's other polls as well that shows his support a bit higher, but I mean all the polls are very clear that his support and trust is still much higher than the ANC, the party leads. 4 years down the road, how much capital has the Cyril Ramaphosa brand, for lack of a better word, got left? And do you expect any big stuff tonight to be announcements, like we're going to do these things?
Yeah, I think the State of the Nation is when government outlines its program, and even the way it's written, it has each department making their input into what their plans are for the year, and then someone amalgamates the whole thing. So there definitely will be a long list of what we're going to do and plans, and also a long list of what we've achieved, of which there have been some achievements. So yes, I expect that. I don't know exactly whether there's going to be any big wow news. I think that one of the big problems Cyril Ramaphosa has had is that he can't do things. He can't get that stuff done. So there's small things that have been done, and we're sort of finally on the way to digital migration. We're finally on the way to getting a broadband spectrum. We're finally on the way to opening up the electricity market. We're finally on the way to sort of opening the market for critical skills. So things are moving along, but I'm not expecting anything big wow. I think from a political point of view, the much more the politics is much more important at this stage. Yes, the market watch the speech, and whatever he says is going to really be looked at very closely. But I think that the issue of state security and the political environment is if he fails to address that in the speech, then the speech fails. So I hope that he does, and I think that people were traumatized and shocked after July to see that the state was as weak as it is, that the police were as weak as they are. So people are still waiting for some direction out of that mess.
Gunita, let's dive right into the hard stuff that we hope we hear him talking about tonight in real terms of what he's going to do, what's going to happen. And because Carol referred to July, let's start there. You covered the report by Professor Sandy Africa in a panel this week that had to investigate the failure, or had to investigate whether there was a failure of the security apparatus in the July unrest in KZN primarily, but also in Gauteng. You've also written a book with our colleagues Jeff Wicks and Kavil Singh called 8 Days in July, in which you explored the intelligence failures specifically in that case. What did we learn over the past, how much is it, 6, 7, 8 months, 9 months, about our security cluster, about the weaknesses? I mean, has Ramaphosa lost control?
First of all, Adrian, it's shocking that 7 months went by and the president kicked the can down the road and waited for this report by Professor Sandy Africa to come out before there is even an indication that there will be certain reforms put in place. There was evidently, you didn't need a panel to tell you that there was a failure by the security cluster. Why? 360 people plus died. 50 billion rand wiped off the economy. more billions had to be poured in terms of what was looted and in terms of the state insurer. And so you had a crisis, you had the undermining of the state, and yet there has been no real, first of all, analysis or like formal analysis of the state in terms of what actually happened until this report that came out this week, and then no action. And so and what you saw the opposite happening. You saw July happening, and then you saw sort of mini rekindling of that unrest in terms of burning of trucks on the N3 highway and that kind of thing. So how do we diagnose July, and what does it mean for Cyril Ramaphosa? July, the genesis of July, one can say it was the incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma. But it was also the spilling over of ANC factional fighting, compounded by the failures of a security cluster. So bad politics, a failed or weak security cluster, and then bad leadership, right? And so what this report told us this week was something quite fascinating. It said, yes, there was police failures. Tick, we knew that. Yes, there was intelligence failures. Yes, we knew that. But then they go as far as saying that the executive failed to take responsibility, and even going as far as pointing to President Cyril Ramaphosa as the leader of cabinet, but as well as the chair of the National Security Council. Now, I know this sounds sort of very technical for people who are, looking, who lost businesses and who probably, lost family members as a result of the unrest. But the reality of it is that the talk of these instigators that was just it, talk, right? And so you cannot talk
insurrection. He called it insurrection.
Absolutely. Now you can't talk justice. You can't take it a step further, accountability, when you don't really have a big picture of what happened, why it happened, and why was it allowed to happen. And that's what we try to do in our book. And I think there's a lot of common threads between the report of Professor Sandy Africa and what we diagnosed or we analyzed at the time. Now, the biggest issue was you have instability in politics that spills over in the executive, that spills over in the top echelons of the security cluster, that then filters its way down, and there's just instability all over. But there are parts where, as the president, he had a role in preempting this. So you can't blame everything on the president, and I think that it would be disingenuous for us to do so. But you have a National Security Council set up, revived rather, from the Mbeki era, so that you have this direct sort of link between the president and the people who are at the coalface of the country's intelligence. And that body did not sit. It only started having sessions when the unrest was already, under control, if you like. And the report says something very important, that ministers did not get instructions from their boss. They couldn't say what they needed to do. So that means the president didn't pick up the phone and say, Defense Minister, you do this. Intelligence Minister, you do that.
It's again that lack of urgency, right?
It's the lack of urgency, and the lack of urgency has real human consequences.
Yes.
As you see now, the unrest is, if the unrest is not an example of what indecisiveness, what not sorting out just the vacancies. Let's use a very, very simplistic example. The vacancies in the top echelons of the security cluster that caused real tangible problems, that there was a huge issue in relation to decision making, talking about the underfunding of the criminal justice system. Something that we've raised with the president to say, you have this over expectation on police, and but there's this real underfunding where more money is going to the VIP protection unit of the police than to public order policing, and how do you reconcile that?
And at the top, the police minister Becky Cele is fighting with the police commissioner Keva Sitole, and the president is just not sorting it out. It's been coming for months now.
And that's something the president can definitely sort out
tonight.
And Professor Sandy Africa says in that report, and her two colleagues say in that high panel report that tension between the minister and the police commissioner had a real devastating effect on the state's ability to protect its citizens.
Carol, July was almost a nightmare moment, right, for our country, because it was that perfect tinderbox of corruption, faction fighting that spills into violence, that opens up our socio-economic weaknesses and the possibility of very poor people helping themselves to what situation there was. I think soon after it erupted, we realized that it wasn't a simple analysis as Jacob Zuma supporters stealing TVs. It was much more complicated than that. Do you think the president will maybe, or should he use what happened in our country, that nightmare moment that, thank goodness, ended, as almost an example of everything that should be fixed in the country?
He could and he should, but he is the one who needs to be fixed. So that's the problem, is the responsibility lies with him, and I can't sort of underline it enough. I mean, one of the first things that Ramaphosa did when he came in 2018 was he commissioned a report on the intelligence services, because we know that the Jacob Zuma administration had used that intelligence service for all sorts of nefarious things and had looted it. And so he commissioned this report. He got the report a year later. It told him, certain people, Arthur Fraser, people must be charged. People must be criminally investigated. They must be charged. The intelligence service must be restructured. And yet he did nothing. He did absolutely nothing.
He's only now moved it into his office.
so now he's moved it, and we really hope there will be action. But it's the problem is kind of extremely deep, and he hasn't tackled it head on. So I mean, those are his problems that he needs to sort out. These are, and yeah, he can maybe say, in ANC meetings, the way he's put it is to say, well, the counter-revolution has got a different face. The counter-revolution is among us. The counter-revolution is coming from inside the ranks of the ANC. And I think that was quite an admission on his part. But what is he going to do about it? And I think this speaks to the fact of the enormous role that ANC politics play in the governance process, the way they paralyze the governance process so that you actually can't move people out of positions in the civil service or in the police or in the intelligence services because it makes you politically vulnerable. And I think that's been the big sort of tightrope that he's been walking all this time, and the strategy of sort of just taking your time, never being the bad guy, taking it slow, it's really not working.
The counter-revolution is hiding in plain sight, I would argue. Here's Lindiwe Sisulu in his cabinet saying that basically he's a liar after that statement that he released, and that the constitution should be overthrown. No action against her.
But we always look for this counter-revolution boogeyman, right? And that's what they succeed at. By pointing at scarecrows. But I think that one can go as far as saying the counter-revolution is probably your inaction. And so there is this precedent that said that actually nothing's going to happen. So there is no real deterrent if you are someone in the security cluster that's loyal to former President Jacob Zuma and just refuse to be loyal to the constitution. You were loyal to former President Jacob Zuma more than you were loyal to your constitutional obligation. And so because nothing happens to anyone who does that, and I mean, you have, I was speaking to a colleague of ours, Vanessa, our opinions editor at News24, and I said, if Parliament burns down and if 360 people die and there's no accountability, what must happen? Must someone literally physically break down the union buildings for there to be some sort of accountability? And I mean, just going back to July and what July meant. So you can tell us that yes, the police were under resourced, and you can kind of shrug your shoulders to say, well, this is not really my fault. It is what it is. We don't have the budget to fund the police. But oh yes, I inherited this perverted state security agency from the Zuma administration. But like you said, you commissioned this report that gave you real practical solutions, and then you sit on it. And so what that does then, it creates this expectation to anyone implicated, even those now kind of, not really implicated, but implicated in the Sandy Africa report, Professor Sandy Africa report now, to say, well, what can he do? What will he do? Because, he's sat in so many other reports that have come his way. And I think that, what July was, and that moment after the violence had just subsided, where he had come on television to address the nation. On one side, he had the chief of the defense force. On the other side, he had the police commissioner, and this was supposed to be this bold moment. The irony of it is that was symbols of our failures, that, the security cluster failed us. And yet we now as citizens had to put our faith back into the security cluster to protect our interests when they didn't do their jobs.
It is just under an hour to go before we hear what President Ramaphosa will say. We are speculating, we're gazing into our crystal balls for another almost hour. And let's see if he will tonight finally announce the split of the state security agency, the intelligence agency, which he announced, I think, in 2019 already, but it hasn't happened. Is that going to be the story of the Ramaphosa presidency? Carol and Konita, I want to move us on to corruption, and specifically the Zondo Commission report, which I think is probably going to be one of the big brags of the night. I think the president will say, look what we have done. We've bared our souls in front of the nation. We have laid bare the scandals and the rot inside the state, inside the ANC, inside state-owned enterprises. What do you expect, Juanita, from the president on the Zondo Commission report? He's now received 2 parts of the one report, trying to get the terminology right. He's received 2 parts. Absolutely shocking details so far. Absolutely shocking detail of how specifically SOEs were hollowed out, were perverted, were infused with Gupta accolades. The role of people like Malusi Gigaba, who, by the way, has not had anything happen to him besides losing his job, but he's still working for the ANC. What do you expect from the president tonight? I think there may be an unrealistic expectation from some of our readers and viewers that the president will tonight announce steps against people implicated. His hands are kind of bound. I have a bit of sympathy for him because he's not the NPA or the police. He cannot charge people. But he can do other stuff.
Yeah.
He can do things in the SOEs, he can do stuff in his executive and in the ANC.
Yeah, so that's the thing. The president, we've been hearing evidence for 4 years at this commission, and every time we would listen to the state capture inquiry, your jaw would drop at the evidence that would come forward. And so he had all of this time to sort of put, even if it was incremental changes in place, as evidence was coming along, they took the approach to say, no, we're going to go wait for the report. Now that the first part of the report and then the second part of the report comes, they say, no, we're going to wait for all 3 reports, and the president's going to then report to Parliament on a way forward no earlier than the end of June. And I find that approach, yes, one can argue that the president's busy and and that kind of thing. But what it does, it again feeds into the thing that it's not urgent, that you don't have to, that you're not prioritizing the shocking findings of the State Capture Commission led by Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. And so I think tonight he would definitely acknowledge it, and I think that it's too important for him to not acknowledge it all, considering that it took so long and it cost us so much as a country. And it was really important, that exercise. But I think that there needs to be some language that shows commitment to implementing the report. So Abby, like you said, the president can't go in and arrest Brian Molefe. He can't do that. What he can announce is, I'm repurposing, or I'm instructing the finance minister at least to capacitate the National Prosecuting Authority more than it would have, or I'm stabilizing things within that space.
Carol, and there was in the first report, the first part of the report, there was very specific stuff that Judge Zondo recommended on the tender system, the procurement system, that has really been used as a piggy bank for the ANC over the past 20 plus years, to fund comrades. I mean, just thinking of Bosasa, how tenders were funded to fund ANC conferences and contributions to the party and even birthday cakes. Surely there's something that's tangible that can be done now. Overhaul of the procurement system, get global best practice, make it completely transparent, bring in AI, machine technical capacity, you know, to analyze and judge companies' tenders. I mean, that's something that's in his powers.
Most definitely, and I think actually, if I'm not wrong, there is a procurement review underway. What worries me is what they're going to come out with is let's slap some more rules onto this. And as we've seen, there are two problems with the procurement system. One is that it's been leaked. You've been able to subvert it for corruption. The other is that it actually just strangles any kind of delivery. So Andre de Ruyter at Eskom trying to, get permission from Treasury to buy or to spend some money on something that's not in the budget, that's outside of the budget, and taking like 6 months to get permission from Treasury to do it. So the procurement system is really, really a big problem in South Africa. On the corruption side, transparency is the issue. The issue is transparency. People should be able to see who got what tender, how much was it, what was the scoring. You should be able to go and sit in the tender adjudication meeting, and
Zoom.
and watch the whole process. Some I think Gauteng started that. I don't know to what extent they carried it on, and obviously during the pandemic, the whole thing collapsed because no rules were applied. And the Western Cape's introducing these procurement reports, which I think are going to give you very detailed reports on procurement and who gets what. So I think that maybe they'll set the tone, because you don't actually have to change the law. You have to change the culture and the practice. So implementing, a transparent tender system, you don't need to change the law. Could be done.
Cal, can I just say that, I mean, I almost get the sentiment, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but people actually don't care if the public knows or not. And if you look at the SIU reports that have been released, I mean, this is some shocking, findings of this collusion of, corrupt officials. And I mean, this is like all around government. There's no element of government that is spared this. But there's almost this shrugging your shoulders. Well, the SIU did its work now, and you guys know that there was corruption, and the figures vary from different, whether COVID-19 being 50 billion or 14 billion, you lose track of it, and there's so much that there's almost the sense now of apathy and indifference. 2 million, 20 million, 200 million. It's just like, okay, the state is being looted. Well, so be it. And that, for me, worries me.
I think a large part of the reason for that is the fact that there are never any consequences. Yeah. So if you could hear about an SIU report catching someone having really taken advantage of the state, and then in 6 months' time you hear of them being in court and getting convicted, then we would all, that would lift the whole mood of the country. We would all care and be happy. But I think people feel so powerless now that corruption has just permeated every part of the state, and there doesn't seem to be a way to get out of it.
And there's almost a rejuvenation, I think that's the word, of the so-called state capturers. I mean, these people are proud and out and doing their thing and tweeting away, and I think that will be a consequence of inaction. I'm going to look forward to what the president says about the ID specifically tonight, because the ID was formed inside the NPA to specifically deal with state capture. It's 3 years down the line, not much has happened. There's not many cases in court. I think we counted 3 or 4 earlier on today. And certainly Shamila Batoy, the National Director of Public Prosecutions, has recommitted herself to work with the Hawks, and I think they're now doing a hit squad of sorts.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's 3 years down the line, the window is closing, so I kind of feel a bit sorry for the president, because he cannot interfere in that work, but he has to say something about it tonight.
And that's the thing about good faith, right? So again, the president does that. He puts all of this hope and aspiration of the public in an appointment. Look what I've done. NPA is going to start doing its work because I've appointed Shamila Batoya, and not expressing that nuance that she alone can't fix things. And then when she doesn't act on, at the speed which people are expecting, it's regarded as a failure. And I think that's important in terms of what is being regarded as successes, right? So we've put this person there. That's not it, right? Or we've fired this person, but who is that person's replacement, or what happened? Talk about the bigger instability in an organization, and that for me is the example of the State Security Agency. You removed, you didn't remove, you shifted around a few rotten apples, and you thought that was enough.
Carol, I want to move us into the economy, which is really your forte. What were some of the promises that was made last year? We looked at the SONA speech from last year, and I remember the president was aghast about the unemployment figure at the time, which was 30%. It's now sitting on 34.9%. What are some of the other things he promised? Can you give us a bit of a scorecard on how he's done?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I think we are starting to move on some of the structural reforms. And why the structural reforms are important is because it's things like making electricity more plentiful, making water available, and institutionalizing the arrangements around water, making broadband more cheaper. So these things are really, really important to do business and to do growth and for economic growth. So those things are happening. But the big picture, so this is sort of the big picture was when the pandemic hit. I think you remember the president and business and Labour, they all came up with this economic reconstruction and development program, I can't remember, ERR, too many acronyms,
in government.
And what this was going to do, and this was more than it's a year and a half ago now, a massive rollout of infrastructure, they said, a massive increase in local production, an employment stimulus, and a rapid expansion of energy generation. So if we look at just how he's done there, I mean, there has been no massive infrastructure rollout. There hasn't been a single big project brought to market since Cyril Ramaphosa became president. Yes, there have been some smaller ones, some housing, but those are private developers building housing. It's not dams, roads,
Small cities,
railways, bullet trains, etc. A massive increase in local production, yes, okay, so they've got the localization policy. It's been heavily criticized as to whether this is the right way to go or not, but we haven't seen any pickup in, real pickup in output at all. Employment stimulus, yes, the president did do his employment stimulus, and I think it was highly successful. It was quite disjointed, though. So you had, I think, about 400,000 job opportunities created, but they were sort of for 3 months here and 3 months there. So I would pronounce it a success, but something needs to be done in terms of is that where we're going to put our energies, or are we moving them into just giving people income support? And then the last sort of pillar of that economic program is the rapid expansion of energy generation. Now, actually what's happened is that we've got less energy availability now than we had a year ago. Yes, he's taken the very important step of starting to liberalize the electricity market. So Eskom is going to be split. It's going to be easier to generate your own electricity if you're a big mine or a corporate or something like that. But yes, all of these things take time. So at the moment, the energy constraint has not been relieved. The 2,000 megawatts, which Gwede Mantashe was doing as an emergency program, I don't know if you remember, after we had stage 6 load shedding, I think it was in 2019, they decided they're having an emergency power procurement.
Yeah.
That emergency power procurement, that's the one that the power ships are part of, is still not adjudicated. It's still not moved. It's adjudicated. It still has not reached a financial close, and it may never. So all of these things that get really bogged down in that particular program, the reason it's stuck is because it was just so badly designed. It was clearly designed for these very expensive power ships. That's what it was designed for, when it could have just been designed to say, let's just build some wind generation, some solar generation, let's just do it as fast as we can. And whoever can actually say they're going to get their stuff in 2 years and we're going to have more, we would be having, that energy would be flowing into the grid today. Okay, instead, we are still years away.
There's clearly tension brewing in cabinet between Mantashe, the champion of fossil fuels, and Ramaphosa, at least when he speaks, supporting renewable energy. But do you think we'll hear some of that tonight? Because Mantashe remains a close ally of his.
Yeah, look, I think it was a big victory. The sort of bit technical, but the sort of lifting of the threshold to say that if you're a company, you don't have to go for a license. You can build up to 100 megawatts capacity, and you can generate. You don't have to go through some sort of laborious licensing. So that was a big victory. But if you remember how the way that victory came about was Cyril Ramaphosa, literally, as Gwede Mantashe put it, twisting his arm, sitting next to him in a press conference, and twisting his arm so that he actually agreed to that reform. So it has not been an easy walk with the energy minister. And if there's one thing that is really, really frustrating, business and labour, organised labour, hell of a frustrated, because this is killing jobs. If there's one thing that's frustrating everyone, it's the electricity supply, the lack of the availability of electricity. So, many people have called for Gwede Mantashe to be fired. He should go. I don't think it helps to attack one individual. So for me, that's counterproductive. But I do think that there needs to be a stronger, common, collective commitment in the cabinet as to what the policy is and where they're going. And that sounds like a simple thing, but in this cabinet and in this ANC, that is a very difficult thing to get common purpose.
Absolutely.
So that's why everything is so difficult. It's always so hard to do.
We're wrapping up this segment before we go to Professor Tenji Kumaluleke to join us. Carol, I just want you to very quickly look into your crystal ball and tell us if we're going to see the announcement of a basic income grant tonight.
Oh, right. Yeah, and I think there have been plenty of signs and signals that there's no big announcement coming tonight, in the sense of like we are henceforth implementing forever a basic income grant. What's very widely expected is an extension of the 350 Rand social relief of distress. And I think it is pretty much linked to what we were also saying around July, because if you remember, that grant was withdrawn 3 or 4 months before the July events happened, and then reinstated after they came, immediately afterwards. So there is a sense that, this is a tinderbox, and people need some kind of support. But I think the ruling party is very far from reaching consensus, because at the same time, especially the finance minister is very aware of the fact that we've got a massive debt problem, and we can't actually just have everything we want.
You've written extensively over the past few weeks about the basic income grant, and there seems to be not a coherent strategy and view about it, even in the President's Economic Advisory Council. Do you think he's going to choose one of those views tonight, or is he going to do a typical Ramaphosa in the middle somewhere, maybe?
No, that can is already kicked. Okay, that can is already kicked. At the ANC Lekgotla. It's definitely not. He's definitely not taking a side tonight. He's deliberating, and actually, this is something that really does need deliberation. There are huge consequences. So let's just do this one right. So I don't have a problem with that, but I'm not expecting him to come out and on one side or the other.
Do a Donald Trumpian announcement of a big. Juanita, we have 2 minutes. You wanted to add something?
No, I was saying, the disservice we do to in public discourse is we create these pariahs, these like all our electricity or energy problems will be fixed if you remove Gwede Mantashe, and we did that in the appointment of or the election of President Cyril Ramaphosa, where it was like, he will fix it all. And I think that this is where 4 years later, that's probably the biggest message that would come out tonight, is that I alone can't fix it all. The state has far bigger problems than one or two people. And I think that, as frustrating as that is, it's easier for us to, pin our fingers. The same with July. We want to see a bad guy on our TV screens. But we have to understand that it's nuanced, it's layered, it's multidimensional, and that the problems are very, very deep.
And the real bad guys are not in prison yet.
That too, Abby. That too.
Carol, Konita, thank you so much so far for our analysis. I thoroughly enjoyed it. We haven't even spoken about COVID-19 in depth. Can you believe that? Sign of the times. We haven't spoken about education. We haven't spoken about land redistribution. Will the president say something about that? Because Section 25 is all but off the table for the moment. And Konita, your favorite topic, the capacity of the state. But let's touch on that when we come back with Professor Tinjiku Maluleke. Please stick with us. We'll be back in a few minutes. We are back at the Media24 head office for sure, Cape Town, with some pre-SONA analysis. I'm still joined by my colleague Juanita Hunter, the political editor of News24, and also by Professor Tinyuko Maluleke, our political analyst on News24, who's joining us from Pretoria, Tshwane. Professor Maluleke, good afternoon and welcome to News24. It's still very bright in Cape Town, that's why I greeted you good afternoon, but it may be evening in Gauteng. Professor Maluleke, I'm going to start by asking you, what do you expect from this year's State of the Nation address by President Ramaphosa in less than half an hour? Are you expecting fireworks or more of the same?
It's a tight choice that you give me. It can't just be either fireworks or more of the same. I think we will certainly get a lot more of what we've had before. I think the president is likely to try and show what he has achieved since the last SONA. And he does have a few things to boast about or to flag as achievements. And I think he will spend a lot of time doing that. And the reason he does this is not merely to look good to the nation, but it's also an important ANC year. So he will be speaking to two constituencies at the same time, ANC members in particular, but also to South Africans like you and I. So I think quite a big chunk of his speech will be on achievements, which we may or may not agree that they all qualify as achievements. Of course, the problem is not so much what he has managed to get done, it is what he has not managed to get done that will become problematic, and that is likely to become the talking point after the SONA.
Professor, we've spent the past almost hour speaking to Juanita and our other colleague Carol Payton, assessing the state of the nation and specifically referring to things like the criminal justice system, the Zondo Commission, ESCOM. Can you elaborate maybe on some of the things that you feel he has achieved and then those things that he and the government has so far failed at?
Well, I think, one of the things, he has always come to us as a president who will focus on reform. That was what the New Dawn was all about. That was what the Tumamina idea was all about. So you are right, he is going to hold out the NPA appointments that he has made as a measure of success in stabilizing key state institutions. He will refer to SARS. He will also talk about his own job program and how many young people have been employed in that environment that he has started. I think he is also likely to point to the commissions and the reports that he has shared with the country. I mean, there's been a rain of reports. We've had the SIU report. More recently, we had the panel of experts report, and then, of course, the ongoing Zondo Commission reports. He will put all of these out as examples of how successful his initiatives of reforming the state and fighting corruption have been. But of course, for every plus, it will be possible to argue the other way as well. But I think those are some of the things that he will point out. He may talk of some developments outside of the state and, of course, his role in the search for vaccines in Africa and the fact that COVID-19, he will try and tell us how well he has done in that area and how he managed to lead South Africa successfully through one of the most difficult periods. So the vaccines, the new arrangements that have been made for vaccines to be produced locally will be an important thing that I think he will want to highlight.
I think, Prof, you know, what's important is what the president doesn't say, right? And what he doesn't...
You will have to raise your voice a little bit. I really struggle to hear you.
But I don't know if you can hear me now, but just to say that it's important that of what the president is not going to say. I think a lot of people are going to be frustrated that he does not tick every single box that he wants them to. In relation, Professor, you know, the unrest that happened, we were speaking about that earlier, that there is this huge expectation that there will be some sort of accountability. What do you think, weighing, Prof, around the importance of what the president also doesn't say tonight?
Yeah, I haven't been able to hear you. I hear Adrian a little better than I can hear you.
Okay.
I was trying to connect my headphones, but my Apple headphones won't speak to this computer.
No, Prof, no worries. We'll continue. If I can try and paraphrase Juanita's question. The question was around the July riots that we saw last year in South Africa and the lack of accountability and consequences so far. What can President Ramaphosa really say about that tonight? Because as we saw this week with the release of the report by Professor Sandy Africa and others, there was a complete failure of the state security agencies, and she also blamed the ANC's infighting and executive inaction for that. Do you think that's something he should and will talk about tonight?
But whether he will talk about it and how, we will have to wait and see. It's very difficult to explain that away. It is very difficult to defend what was clearly a failure in state coordination, a failure in security and intelligence, in spite of whatever measures he has put into place. It's a massive failure of governance and oversight by his own government. You can look at the July event from the right or left or from whichever angle. What remains undeniable is that we were exposed. Not just the government, but the whole country was exposed as vulnerable in more ways than one can list. We are vulnerable in part because there is enough desperate people out there in this country, poor enough, desperate enough to be mobilized in the manner in which they were mobilized in July. But also, we are vulnerable because we have a police and defense ministries that are at 6s and 7s and intelligence that is almost absent. That is what makes us vulnerable. And this report points the finger at the cabinet, the report of the expert panel. And, if the cabinet is to blame, then you ask yourself, why has so little been done in terms of heads rolling in cabinet? And if cabinet is to blame for such a massive thing, why is cabinet not being prosecuted in one way or the other for failure to lead the country at that time?
And that Prof, there's very tangible things that the president can do in that space. He's the leader of cabinet. He can remove cabinet ministers like the Minister of Police. He can sort out the conflict that there still is between the police minister and the chief of police, General Sitole, who seemingly are not on speaking terms in a country ravaged by crime and corruption.
It is amazing. It is amazing how the Minister of Defense would say one thing and the Minister of Police will say the other. The Commissioner of Police will say one thing and the Minister of Police will say the other. And so, it's not theory when we say there is dissonance and disorganization and lack of coordination at the highest level. in government. And none of the ministers were really punished. I mean, one was moved sideways to a very powerful position. The Minister of Police is still in his post. So, you know, there really is a problem there. And I think these kinds of problems are the kinds that it would help if the president was to speak of them and indicate what precisely he's going to do about them going forward.
Professor, there's been a lot of speculation in recent days and weeks about a potential basic income grant. I mean, the discussion has been going on for years, I guess, but of late, it seems like it's becoming a much closer reality than it has been before. Our writer at large, Carol Payton, has reported over the past 2 weeks of a seemingly split opinion by the President's own Economic Advisory Council on the likelihood and feasibility of a basic income grant. Now, we have the 350 social relief of distress grant that was introduced under COVID-19, which we expect to be extended tonight. What is your expectations about a basic income grant, and do you think that could be the big story of tonight's State of the Nation address?
It is possible. I think that the president is in need of making a few announcements that will inspire the majority of South Africans, even if these announcements will not please everyone. And so he may go there. Of course, the fact that there were disagreements between his advisors was leaked. And I suspect that the president wouldn't have liked that to happen. But I think it's healthy for there to be disagreements about these kinds of things going forward. There's nothing wrong with people, disagreeing with the basic notion if they feel they can argue against it. The problem is how you deal with so much unemployment and so much poverty. And related to that is the problem of how do you sustain these social grants in the long term, and what will happen when the economy is just no longer able to even provide for these. Because I think key for me would be to hear what economic recovery plan the president comes up with this time, because that is almost as important, if not more important, than the announcement of a basic income grant.
Prof, the economy, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be in a better shape than it's been a year ago. Last year, when the president spoke to us, the unemployment rate was on around 30%. This year, it's on 34.9%. How does the president claim success in such a dire climate when unemployment is just not being turned around?
Well, State of the Nation addresses. You and I can sit here, having listened to so many. We can work out some of the themes that recur. So there is always look how well we have done section. It always comes. And the economy is a place where government is desperate to prove that although things are bad, they are trying. And there are two ways of dealing with that area. One is to talk about the social grant system and how well it is working. The other is, of course, to talk about plans for economic growth, which have been fewer and fewer in recent years. So I think he will still try. It's hard. The economy has never been hit this hard, and COVID has not made things easier. The unemployment rate is very, very high, and there is only so much you can do with social grants. Even the borrowing that government has now had to do, all of these, I think we are looking for some olive branches, for some rays of hope, for some plan that tells us we will emerge, and emerging in a manner that means we don't live from hand to mouth as a country, that we don't have to rely on borrowing, and that we don't have to rely on social grants, because there is only social grants can only go so far and no further.
Prof, if I can just,
will be enough.
Prof, just a final question from my side, and then we'll let you go to settle in for the speech. This could be, of course, technically, although not maybe realistically, but technically this could be President Ramaphosa's last State of the Nation speech if he is defeated in December at the ANC's leadership conference. Is this something that will haunt him for the rest of this year? Is he going to look over his shoulder for the next 11 months, which could lead to less state action and implementing of government policies?
Well, technically, it ought not to be his last State of the Nation address, even if he loses in December. That is if he is not recalled. But the ANC, having used the recall instrument twice already, they've developed an appetite for it. So if he loses in December, I think you are right to suggest that if he loses in December, he's likely not to be allowed to give another State of the Nation address. I think this president will survive. I think he will survive the ANC politics of December. Personally, I think he will not survive triumphantly any more than he got this presidency with any sense of triumph by a whisker, and I think he will survive again, because I don't know that the ANC has someone else at the moment to field. So I think they're likely to stick with him, but it's gonna be a tougher term than this one. If you think this one was tough because of COVID-19, his next term as president of the country is going to be tougher, because the Luthuli House is going to be harder to manage. Second terms anyway are always problematic, but I think his may be especially problematic.
Professor Tiniko Maluleke, always a pleasure and privilege to hear your insights. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on the few minutes before we hear the State of the Nation address. We will soon speak to you again. I am now coming back to my colleague Konita Hunter in our studio in Cape Town. Just briefly, Konita, we can now hear the gun salute. I'm always never sure how many shots there are. I'm sorry, I'm not a military man, but the gun salute going off now. You can also hear that.
I mean, lots of excitement on the roads of Cape Town now. It's just less than 10 minutes away now for the president to actually deliver his address. Our colleagues there, Jan Gerber and Jason Felix, Junior Komalo, who are in the precinct, telling us that you're not having that procession of the judiciary. They have already taken their seats. So has the premiers from the 9 provinces. So the guests had sort of, everyone was settling in, about 30 minutes to go, and now you're going to see the parade, and I mean, that's just the normal pomp and ceremony that we used to. But I mean, it is important. It's the opening of Parliament. And I think that what's quite interesting was there was a lot of anticipation for the EFF to create some sort of disturbance, because they had threatened it. They wanted all of their MPs to be physically in the City Hall for this opening of Parliament. They threatened court action, which they later withdrew last week. There was a little bit, our colleagues say, there was a little bit of a scuffle as they entered, but they took their seats. Interesting guests include the mayor of the city, the new mayor of the city of Cape Town, Jordan Hill-Lewis, that's part of the invited guest. There's members of the diplomatic corps that would be listening. And like Carol said, the president has to also speak to the market. So there's going to be a lot of eyes on South Africa and on the City Hall in the next under 10 minutes.
I always, when I hear, I just heard these airplane, these planes, these fighter planes.
Yes, flying over,
which is obviously part of the annual State of the Nation pomp and ceremony, and I always think of the arms deal when I hear them, because they cost us a lot of money at a time when we didn't really have them. Conita Hunter, thank you so much for joining me. We will be back in the News24 studio just after the President's State of the Nation address to analyze what he has said. Will he introduce a basic income grant tonight? Will that be a big change in our economic fiscal constitution? Will he say something about the Zondo Commission? Will he announce strict measures around procurement, the tender processes and the National Prosecuting Authority? Might he announce our next Chief Justice? Who knows? That will be a big surprise. I don't expect that to happen tonight, but who knows with President Ramaphosa. All of these matters will be cleared up for us by the President in the next 60 to 90 minutes, after which we would like to welcome you back onto this platform at News24 to listen to post-SONA analysis. Thanks so far for being with us.
Recording in progress.
Of the Republic of South Africa. Sinampathala samuradia khosi sebona motlamo ya le boalo ga mafura le rokela banne ye re setsiba se tlala batla ba go. Re dumela thobela matamela Cyril Ramaphosa ra marentela yo reteletseng. Ra kwata mo thokara le toka o le matshaba di bona. Ke ra ba mo thoka ka nyondiwa. Aba rutsa pila ga thutontle tsa limpapa kwa madikolo a bokoni nyeng ya. Halo santumelelo tabo tsa mogalo wa mabora e leng enong. Ramaphosa bokhutsane ga se bogola ba go ata bo boko ka o le matshola diko. Ara khale ba mo Ramaphosa. Go tlhagile le Ramaphosa ba dipitsi tsa siaga di sala di sala. Ba palami ba ikeketela ka mo. Ba tamela o pari. Dirila mogaro COVID-19 o metsa ba gale jaaka noga tshwareme ka mo. Afrika Borwa wa rwala matse. Ola di tsamo mo ka merero ya dipolitiki wa bale di ofisore. O khosi ya di khosu busasa. Mara Ramaphosa re hwale tse phandepo. O ka di tela kuma morofo.
Please be seated. Honorable members and guests, in the interest of safety for all present in the chamber, we request that you please keep your masks on and sit in your designated area. Thank you. Honorable members, the President has called this joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces in terms of Section 84(2)(d) of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, read with Joint Rule 7(1)(a), in order to deliver his State of the Nation address to Parliament. I now call on the Honorable the President to address the joint sitting.
Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula, the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Mr. Amos Masondo, Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. David Dabede Mabuza, former President of the Republic of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, former Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, former Deputy President Ms. Balega Mbete, former Speaker of the National Assembly, by COVID-19, by rising unemployment, and deepening poverty in our country. It spoke to the devastation of a pandemic that over the past 2 years has taken the lives of tens of thousands of South Africans, put 2 million people out of work, and brought misery to many families in our country. The fire in Parliament reminded us of the destruction, the violence, and the looting that we witnessed in parts of our country in July last year, of the more than 300 lives lost and many more livelihoods that were ruined. As we reflect on the past year, we recall the words of our former President Thabo Mbeki, who reminded us that, and he said, "Trying times need courage and resilience." And he continued to say, "Our strength as a people is not tested during the best of times," meaning that it is during the worst of times that our courage is really truly tested. That we are gathered together in Cape Town City Hall instead of the National Assembly reflects the extraordinary circumstances of this time. It reflects the determination of our presiding officers and indeed all members of the two houses of Parliament who determined that the work of this democratic institution should continue without interruption. And I applaud our presiding officers and all of you. There are moments in the life of a nation when old certainties are unsettled and new possibilities emerge. In these moments, there is both the prospect of great progress and the risk of reversal. Today, we are faced with such a moment. The path that we choose now will determine the course for future generations. That is why we are taking steps to strengthen our democracy and reaffirm our commitment to a constitution that protects us all, the most wonderful constitution in the world. We are working together to revitalize our economy and end the inequality and injustice that impedes our progress as a nation. We are standing together against corruption and to ensure that those who are responsible for state capture will be punished for their crimes. We are rebuilding the state and restoring trust and pride in our public institutions. If there is one thing we all agree on, it is that the present situation that we are in now, of deep poverty, unemployment, and inequality, is unacceptable and unsustainable. There is agreement amongst a broad and diverse range of South Africans that fundamental change and fundamental reforms are needed to revive economic growth in our country. There is a need both to address the immediate crisis and to create conditions for long-lasting stability and development. To achieve this, South Africa needs a new consensus, a consensus that is born out of a common understanding of our current challenging situation and a recognition of the need to address the challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. This should be a new consensus which recognizes that the state must create an environment in which the private sector can invest and unleash the dynamism of our economy. But equally, it is also an environment in which South Africans can live a better life and unleash the energy of their capabilities. This should also be a new consensus which embraces our shared responsibility to one another as South Africans and acknowledges that we are all in this together. And together, we must find solutions that will take our nation forward. As the social partners, being government, labor, business, and community-based entities, we are working to determine the actions we will take together to build such a consensus. We have begun discussions on what trade-offs are needed and what contribution we will each need to make to take this country forward. We have given ourselves 100 days to finalize what I call a comprehensive social compact to grow our economy, to create jobs, and to combat hunger. This work will build on the foundation of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, which we adopted, which remains our common program to rebuild the economy. We remain focused on the priorities we identified in the State of the Nation last year, they being overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic, a massive rollout of infrastructure, a substantial increase in local production, and employment stimulus to create jobs and support livelihoods, the rapid expansion of our energy generation capacity. To be effective, this social compact needs to include every South African and every part of our society. Worst pandemic in more than a century. Since COVID-19 reached our shores, we have endured successive waves of infection, the emergence of new variants, and the devastating cost of nearly 100,000 recorded COVID-19 deaths. South Africans have responded to this grave threat with great courage and resilience, but also with compassion and restraint. Over the past 2 years, we have taken unprecedented actions to strengthen our health system, to build laboratory capacity and prevent infections. The nation owes a great debt of gratitude to the dedicated health workers and to other frontline staff who put their own health and their own lives at risk to care for the ill and the vulnerable during this period. Within 2 weeks of the first reported infection in our country, I announced the establishment of the Solidarity Fund with the goal of uniting the country in the fight against the pandemic. In a wave of generosity that we have never seen before in our country, a wave of generosity that swept throughout the country, the fund raised 3.4 billion rand from more than 300,000 individual South Africans and companies. More than 400 individuals and 100 companies volunteered their time and services for free. The fund has played a pivotal role in supporting the national health response and alleviating the humanitarian crisis that confronted our country and our people. I would like to thank everyone who contributed to the Solidarity Fund. And many of those individuals who contributed were a number of you as members of Parliament. So I applaud you and I thank you and congratulate you for that. And I also congratulate and thank the countless other initiatives to support those affected by the pandemic. And they range from people who gave food parcels, people who went out of their way to care for those who were affected and infected by COVID-19. As the trajectory of the pandemic has continued to change, we have had to adapt and evolve. Our approach has been informed throughout by the best available scientific evidence, and we have stood out both for the quality of our scientists and for their involvement in every step of our response. During the past year, we have focused on accelerating our vaccine rollout. So far, we have, as a nation, administered some 30 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines. Consequently, nearly 42% of all adults and 60% of everyone over 50 years of age is fully vaccinated. And this is a real achievement that many countries on our continent have not been able to reach. We are now ready to enter a new phase in our management of the pandemic. It is our intention, and also my clear intention, to end the national state of disaster as soon as we have finalized We will do so as soon as we have finalized other measures under the National Health Act, as well as other legislation to manage and contain the pandemic. This we have to do. Now, all of you will know that by now, nearly all restrictions on economic and social activity have already been lifted. Vaccines have proven to be the best defense we have against illness and death from COVID-19. And I've always said, even from a personal point of view, that had I not been vaccinated in December when I contracted COVID-19, I probably would not be standing here before you. My defense was being vaccinated. If we all get vaccinated and continue to observe basic health measures and remain forever vigilant, we will be able to get on with our lives, even with the virus in our midst. The state of the nation is linked inextricably to the state of our economy. In addition to the divides of race, geography, education, status, COVID-19 has exacerbated the divide between those who are employed and those who are unemployed. Last year, our unemployment rate reached its highest recorded level. Unemployment has been caused by low growth, which has in turn resulted from long-term decline in investment in our economy, which has lasted for a number of years. In the last year, we have benefited from a clear and stable macroeconomic framework, from strong commodity prices, from mining, and a better-than-expected recovery. However, we've been held back by an unreliable electricity supply, and the inefficient network industry, and the high cost of doing. We have been taking extraordinary measures to enable businesses to grow and create jobs alongside expanded public employment and social protection which we have put in place. We all know that government does not create jobs. Businesses create jobs. Facts be faced, around 80% of all the people who are employed in South Africa are employed in the private sector. The key task of government is to create the conditions that will enable the private sector and this is the case whether we like it or not all over the world. It is when government creates that environment that will enable businesses, both small and big, to emerge, to grow, to access new markets, to create new products, and to hire more employees. The problems in the South African economy are deep, and they are also structural. When electricity supply cannot be guaranteed, when our railways and ports are inefficient, when innovation is held back by a scarcity of broadband spectrum, when water quality deteriorates in our municipalities and where we live, companies are reluctant to invest and the economy cannot function properly. With a view to addressing these challenges, we are accelerating the implementation of far-reaching structural reforms with a view to modernizing and transforming these industries, to unlock investment, to reduce the costs of doing business and to increase competitiveness and to heighten growth in our economy. The electricity crisis is one of the greatest threats to economic and social progress. In the last few days, we have once again been reminded of the fragility of our electricity system. Load shedding continues to have a huge impact on the lives of South Africans, disrupting businesses and placing additional strains on families and our communities. Due to our aging power stations, poor maintenance, policy missteps, and the ruinous effects of state capture, our country has a shortfall of around 4,000 megawatts of electricity. During the past year, we have taken firm steps to bring additional generation capacity online as quickly as possible to close this shortfall. As a result, several new energy generation projects will be coming online over the next few years, and this includes over 500 megawatts from the remaining projects in bid window 4 of the Renewable Energy Program, which are at an advanced stage of construction. Also includes 2,600 megawatts from bid window 5 of the Renewable Energy Program, for which the preferred bidders were announced last year. It also includes up to 800 megawatts from those risk mitigation power projects that are ready to proceed. We also include in this list 2,600 megawatts from bid window 6 of the Renewable Energy Program, which will soon be opened. 3,000 megawatts of gas power and 500 megawatts of battery storage, for which requests for proposals will be released later this year. Additionally, an estimated 4,000 megawatts from embedded generation projects that the mining industry is currently working on, and approximately 1,400 megawatts currently in the process of being secured by various municipalities once we opened the way for them to generate. In addition to closing the energy supply shortfall, we are implementing fundamental changes to the structure of the electricity sector. Eskom has established a separate transmission subsidiary and is on track to completing its own unbundling by December 2022. The utility has continued with its intensive maintenance program to reverse many years of neglected maintenance and underperformance of existing plants. To regulate all these reforms, Cabinet yesterday approved amendments to the Electricity Regulation Act for public comment. These far-reaching amendments will enable a competitive market for electricity generation and the establishment of an independent state-owned transmission company. Our economy cannot grow without efficient ports and railways. Over several years, the functioning of our ports has declined relative to ports in other parts of the world, and particularly on our own continent as well. This constrains economic growth and holds us back from acceding to higher levels of economic growth. The agricultural sector, for example, relies heavily on efficient, well-run ports to export their produce to overseas markets. The Minister of Agriculture was telling me that we've now opened the Chinese market for citrus, for a number of other products that we produce or we grow here. And we therefore need efficient ports to be able to export all that produce to high-demanding markets like China and many other places. Fresh produce cannot wait for days and even weeks while stuck in a terminal. This hurts businesses and compromises our country's reputation as an exporter of fresh produce. And fresh produce also includes meat products and many others. Transnet, faced with all these challenges, is addressing these challenges and is currently focused on improving operational efficiencies at our ports through procuring additional equipment, implementing new systems to reduce congestion. I have been able to go to our ports and I have seen the work that Transnet is doing in this regard. And Transnet will soon ask for proposals from private partners for the Durban and the Ngqura container terminals within the next few months, which will enable partnerships to be in place at both terminals by October of 2022. Transnet will start the process of providing third-party access to its freight rail network from April 2022 by making slots available on the container corridor between Durban and City Deep in Gauteng. Transnet has developed partnerships with private sector entities to address cable theft, which has been paralyzing our railways, as well as to address vandalism on the freight rail network through advanced technologies and additional security personnel. Now, this collaborative effort is already showing results in reduced disruptions to the rail operations. the poor state of passenger rail in our country has a direct and detrimental impact on the lives of our people. We are therefore working hard to rehabilitate the passenger rail network in 10 priority corridors. The Southern Line in Cape Town and the Mabopane Line in Pretoria has been reopened to be followed by the remaining lines in the next year. One of the greatest constraints on the technological development of our economy has been the unacceptable, which has taken years, unacceptable delay in the migration of broadcasting from analog to digital. The switch off of analog transmission has been completed in a number of provinces already. As I announced in the State of the Nation address last year, the other provinces will move to digital signal by the end of March 2022. And I have seen the joy that our people have when they gain access to digital and have the pleasure to watch television, which is clear, which has many more stations, and this we are going to continue doing. Now, as part of this process, government will continue to subsidize low-income households so that they can access a set-top box and make the switch to digital TV. Our communications regulator, ICASA, will commence with the process of auctioning the high-frequency communication spectrum in about 3 weeks from now. Now, this will unlock new spectrum for mobile telecommunications for the first time ever in over a decade. In addition, we will facilitate the rapid deployment of broadband infrastructure across all municipalities by establishing a standard model for the granting of municipal permissions. These reforms will revolutionize the country's technological development, making faster broadband accessible to more people, but more importantly, reducing the cost of digital communications. The world over, the ability to attract skilled immigrants is the hallmark of a modern, thriving economy. We are therefore streamlining the modernizing of the visa application process to make it easier to travel to South Africa for tourism, for business, for study, or even for work. As we committed last year, the e-visa system has now been launched in 14 countries, including mega countries such as China, India, Kenya, and Nigeria. The revised critical skills list has now already been published for the first time since 2014, following the detailed technical work and extensive consultations with business and labor. The updated list reflects the skills that are in shortage today to ensure that our immigration policy matches the demands of our economy. A comprehensive review of the work visa system is currently underway, led by former Director General of Home Affairs, Mr. Mavuso Msimang. This review is exploring the possibility of new visa categories that could enable economic growth, such as a startup visa and a remote working visa. Now, these are all the reforms that underpin and undergird the growth of our economy. Water is the most critical, precious natural resource to all of us as South Africans. It is vital to life, to development, as well as to economic growth. That is why we have prioritized institutional reforms in this area to ensure future water security, investment in water resources, and maintenance of existing assets. We have embarked on the process of institutional reform, incapacitating the Department of Water and Sanitation, and reviewing water boards in as far as their mandates are concerned, and ensuring that they serve municipalities in terms of our district development model. Now, these reforms are being championed by a minister who's been to every water source in our country and has examined precisely what needs to be done. A comprehensive turnaround plan is being implemented to streamline the process for water use license applications. Now, these applications used to take forever, up to 3 years, and they are now being streamlined, and the target is to clear the backlog of applications by June 2022 and to process 80% of all applications within 90 days during the next financial year. Now, legislation has been prepared for the establishment of the National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency and will be published for public comment within the next month. The water quality monitoring system has been reinstated to improve enforcement of water standards at municipal level and to enable the Department of Water and Sanitation to intervene where water and sanitation services are failing. Now, this is how we are going to be able to make interventions even at the local level. When water is not provided to our people, we will be able to intervene and assist those municipalities. We will review the policy and regulatory framework for a whole number of other processes, but more importantly, which will come as sweet news for our people in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, for industrial hemp and cannabis to realize huge potential for investment and job creation. Now, this natural product, which our people have been farming with and harvesting for a number of purposes, is now going to be industrialized and no longer just being resorted to the smoke process. Many countries around the world have already advanced to higher levels. Our immediate neighbor in Lesotho has moved ahead on the industrialization of cannabis in leaps and bounds. And the products that are to be eked out of hemp and cannabis are in great demand around the world. We want to harness this so that we can release and unleash the energy of our ordinary farmers in the various parts of our country, especially in the Eastern Cape, as well as in KwaZulu-Natal, particularly in the Pondoland area. While structural reforms are necessary for us to revive economic growth, they are not enough on their own. And there are quite a number of other structural reforms that we are in conversation with the private sector, and we are ad idem in as far as how deep and how far we should go. This year we are undertaking far-reaching measures to unleash the potential of small businesses, micro businesses, and informal businesses. These are the businesses that create the most jobs and provide the most opportunities for poor people to earn a living. We have started discussions with social partners as part of the social compact to process a number of measures And some of those will be how we enable small and medium enterprises to operate without too many strictures on areas such as the labor market regulations for smaller businesses to enable them to hire more people while continuing to protect the rights of working people. A new redesigned loan scheme is being introduced to enable small businesses to bounce back from the pandemic and the civic unrest that we went through. This new bounce back scheme incorporates lessons from the previous loan guarantee scheme, which did not work as well as I had anticipated when we launched it, if you recall, under the stimulus program that we launched, which was quite unprecedented in the history of our country. This new and redesigned loan scheme, which will serve small businesses, will involve in development finance institutions and non-bank SME providers in offering finance, expand the types of financing available, and adjust eligibility criteria to encourage greater uptake. The National Treasury is working with industry stakeholders to finalize the scheme, and the Minister of Finance will provide details soon. We are reviewing the Business Act alongside a broader review of legislation that affects small and medium enterprises to reduce the regulatory burden on informal businesses. We have found that there are too many regulations in our economy and our country that are unduly complicated, costly, and difficult to comply with. Now, this prevents companies from growing and creating jobs. I will forever remember the imagery of a woman who was selling these dog beds, which she had sewn up herself. She was on the side of the road selling, and the Metro Police accosted her and went on to try and arrest her. And in fact, arrested her, put her in the back of a van, police van. And her crime was, they said, she did not have a permit to sell a product which was going to put food on the table for her children. Now that, for me, is the regulatory strictures that we have introduced in our economy gone completely wild. Because what we need to be doing is to support that lady to sell products and support her family. Now, we are therefore working to improve the business environment for companies of all sizes through a dedicated capacity in the presidency to reduce red tape. If we are to make progress in cutting unnecessary bureaucratic delays for businesses, we need dedicated capacity with the means to make changes. I've therefore appointed Mr. Sipho Nkosi to head up a team in my office to cut red tape across our economy and also our government. Now, Mr. Nkosi has extensive experience in business, including the fact that he was CEO of a mining company and is currently the chairperson of the Small Business Institute. Knows very well what red tape does to business and will be working alongside our officials to cut the red tape to enable our businesses to thrive and to grow. The red tape team will identify priority reforms for the year ahead, including mechanisms to ensure government departments pay suppliers within the required 30 days. The team will also work with other departments and agencies to unblock specific obstacles to investment and business growth. It will support the current initiatives to simplify processes relating to property registration, cross-border trade, construction permits, and all that. Infrastructure is central to our economic reconstruction and recovery. Through innovative funding and improved technical capabilities, we have prioritized infrastructure projects to support economic growth and better livelihoods, especially in energy, roads, and water management. The Infrastructure Fund is at the center of this effort, with a 100 billion rand allocation from the fiscus. The Infrastructure Fund is now working with state entities to prepare pipeline projects with an investment value of approximately 96 billion in student accommodation, social housing, telecommunications, water and sanitation, and transport. Several catalytic projects to the value of 21 billion are expected to start construction this year. Of this, 2.6 billion is contributed by government, and the balance is financed by the private sector and development funding institutions. Government will make an initial investment of 1.8 billion in bulk infrastructure, which will unlock 7 private sector projects to the value of 133 billion. For millions of South Africans in rural areas, roads and bridges provide access to markets, to employment opportunities, to families and social services. Yet many children still have to brave overflowing rivers to reach schools, and motorists have to battle impassable roads to reach the next town. One person was telling me that they now have to drive on the side of the road because many roads are so bad. We are therefore upscaling the Welisizwe Rural Bridges Program to deliver 95 bridges a year from the current 14. Our South African National Defence Force is the implementing agent of the Welisizwe program and has demonstrated the expertise of the SANDF engineers in bridge construction. Earlier this week, I was in Tahalane village in Limpopo to launch a new road that is going to make a huge difference in the lives of neighboring communities. This road was constructed using block paving and other materials, which is a method that enables us to build durable roads faster and more cost-effectively. I would like to see a situation where many of the roads that we have in our country, particularly in our township areas, in our rural areas, and in outlying areas, being paved, because paving is so much cheaper than using asphalt. The Rural Roads Program will use labor-intensive methods to construct or upgrade nearly 700 kilometers of rural road over the next few years. This social enterprise program includes access to roads in Limpopo, in the Eastern Cape, and to move from gravel to surface upgrades in the Free State, in Northwest, and capacity connectivity improvements in the Western Cape. Government has initiated the process of delivering the Umzimvubu water project. The project is made of a number of dams. The Ntabelanga Dam, the Lalini Dam, an irrigation infrastructure and hydroelectric plant, Ntabelanga water treatment works and bulk distribution infrastructure to reticulate to the neighboring communities. Now, the closing date for the first of the two-stage procurement process is scheduled to close later this year, with a preferred bidder likely to be announced later this year as well. Government is introducing an innovative social infrastructure delivery mechanism to address issues that afflict the delivery of school infrastructure. The mechanism will address the speed, the financing and funding, quality of delivery, mass employment and maintenance. We still need to build some 2,500 or so schools in our country, and using current budgetary methods or processes, it'll probably take us 75 years to close that gap. However, with the new innovative mechanisms for delivery and financing, we should be able to do it much sooner. The delivery mechanism will introduce a special purpose vehicle working with prominent DFIs and the private sector to deliver school education infrastructure, with government obviously continuing to finance the building of schools. This approach is being piloted in schools in the Northern Cape and in the Eastern Cape, and will soon move also to other provinces, Limpopo and many other provinces. Now, over the past year, government has built on its successful hydrogen SA strategy to make major strides in positioning South Africa as a global leader in this new market. And this is so because the endowments that we have as a country and as a nation for hydrogen capability are quite high. This includes the development of a hydrogen society roadmap for the next 10 years, as well as a green hydrogen strategy for the Northern Cape, supporting the development of green hydrogen pipeline worth around 270 billion rand. Now, the damage caused by the theft of scrap metal and cable on our infrastructure, like electricity, the trains and other vital services, is enormous. We will take decisive steps this year, both through improved law enforcement and by considering further measures to address the sale or export of such scrap metal. An important pillar of our economic reconstruction and recovery plan is to revitalize our manufacturing base and to create globally competitive export industries. In the past year, we launched new master plans in the steel industry, in the furniture industry, and global business services. Now, through these plans, which build on the other master plans that are already in operation and that are already yielding quite a lot of investment as well as job creation. Through these plans, business, government, and labor are working together to increase production and to create more jobs in the sectors. In the clothing industry, a number of retailers have announced ambitious plans with regard to localization sourcing. One of these retailers is Foschini, partly owned by workers, kindly made the suit that I'm wearing today at its new formal wear factory in Prestige here in the Western Cape in Epping. 5 years ago, more than 80% of all Foschini Group merchandise came from East Asia. Today, nearly half of their merchandise is locally made, which shows a great deal of progress. The genuine leather shoes that I'm wearing today were made by members, were made by members of the National Union of Leather and Allied Workers from Bolton Footwear in Cape Town and Dick Whittington Shoes in Pietermaritzburg in KZN. Now, the reason one says this is to say, let us all promote localization. Let us buy locally made clothes and products, because it does not only create jobs for our people here in South Africa. Local is lekker, and let us do that. If you look at countries such as China, what has catapulted or continue to catapult them to a higher level is that they, as Chinese, consume what is locally made. We can also move up that scale and see more growth in our economy as we buy more local products and everything else. Nearly 4 years ago, we set ourselves a target of mobilizing 1.2 trillion rand in new investment over 5 years. By the time of the third South African Investment Conference in November 2020, we had reached 776 billion rand in investment commitments. Next month, on the 24th of March, we will be holding the fourth South African Investment Conference in Johannesburg. We will seek to showcase the many investment opportunities available as South Africa continues its recovery from COVID-19, and we will also report back on the progress of previous commitments. Following the resolution of the African Union Summit over the past weekend, trading can now begin under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The market on the African continent is now wide open. South African companies are poised to play a key role in taking up opportunities that this presents for preferential access to other African markets. And wherever we have gone on the African continent, either on state visits and holding business forums, we have found a great deal of demand for South African companies to come and invest, but also for South African products. So the market is wide open for South African companies to trade with other countries on our continent. The Free Trade Area Agreement is about Africa taking charge of its destiny and growing its economies much faster and exponentially. We will continue to pursue Africa's health sovereignty, working with other African countries and international partners to support the strengthening of the continent's capacity to respond not only to COVID-19 pandemic, but to other pandemics that may well come. We will increase our efforts to develop Africa's ability to manufacture vaccines. We have made significant progress here in South Africa with regard to the manufacturing of vaccines. We now have 2 African companies, Aspen and BioVac, in which the government has a stake, which contracts to produce COVID-19 vaccines. 2 additional vaccine projects have also been announced. In addition, we have full local production capability for ventilators, hand sanitizers, medical-grade face masks and gloves, and therapeutic drugs and anesthetics. This production capability, which is worth many billions of rands of production annually, has been put in place in less than 2 years. When COVID arrived on our shores, we did not really have the full capability of manufacturing all these medical supplies that are diagnostic and therapeutics. We now have, which goes to demonstrate the resilience of South African businesses to rise up to the occasion. And when we set up at the continental level the African Medical Supplies Platform, many of our companies were able to start trading on that platform, exporting medical supplies to various countries on our continent, also internationally, and particularly to the other region of our continent, which is the Caribbean. South African products have been exported to various countries, securing them vital supplies and expanding jobs for many young South Africans. While we will help existing industries to grow, we are also turning new opportunities for growth and jobs. Government and the private sector have worked closely together to grow the global business services sector from a small group of companies to one of the world's leading players. And I should say here, South Africa has become an attractive market for global business services. Our young people are being employed in large numbers. The global business service sector is on track to create 500,000 new jobs over the next few years. And these are young people who are being attracted to these opportunities. The hemp and cannabis, I go back to its sector, which is a new sector we are promoting, has the potential to create more than 130,000 new jobs. We are streamlining the regulatory process so that hemp and cannabis can thrive like it is in other countries. And as I said earlier, it is going to benefit a number of our people, particularly in those areas where this is grown in a big way as a great commodity. Now, as we proceed, we are finding that these new sectors, the sectors that should be promoted, are sectors that we should focus attention on because they create more jobs on an ongoing basis. The sectors that we are focusing on are sectors that a number of other countries have already shown a great deal of growth in already. Now, with all this, we are finding that we can inject growth into our economy. We can see exponential growth as more and more of these new sectors come forward. Now, other sectors are the social sector, for instance, including early childhood development, nursing, social work, and community services, which have shown significant potential not only to create jobs, but to provide vital services to communities, as well as to provide training for young people. Some of the country's mature industries also have a lot to offer in revamping the industrial and manufacturing potential of our country. The agricultural sector has significant potential for job creation in crops such as citrus, table and dried grapes, subtropical fruit, avocados, berries, and nuts. Master plans in the sugar and poultry industry are contributing significantly to increased investment, improved production and transformation. To attract investors into the mining minerals needed in the new global economy, we will soon be finalizing our mining exploration strategy. We will continue to support the development of upstream gas industry as it holds huge potential for job creation and broader economic development. We will ensure that this is done in strict accordance with the environmental as well as other laws of our country, and that where there are differences, we work together to resolve those differences in the interests of our country and the interests of our people, particularly with regard to creating jobs. We live in one of the regions of the world that is most affected by climate change. We frequently experience droughts, floods, and other extreme weather events associated with global warming. Recently, floods have affected a number of provinces in our country, including KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and the Eastern Cape. These have already caused enormous damage to infrastructure, but also to livelihoods. In the last year, we have made important strides in the fight against climate change and at the same time securing our economic competitiveness. For the first time, our climate targets are compatible with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is the goal that all countries agreed to as part of the Paris Climate Agreement and is essential to prevent the worst effects of climate change. Now, since I established the Presidential Climate Change Commission, working with Deputy Chairperson to the Commission, Vale Musa, a little more than a year ago, it has done much work to support a just transition to a sustainable, inclusive, resilient, and low-carbon economy. At the International Climate Conference in Glasgow last November, South Africa was able to arrive at a historic 131 billion rand deal with a number of partners. This first of its kind partnership will involve repurposing and repowering some of the coal plants that are reaching the end of their lives and creating new livelihoods for workers and communities most affected and impacted by this change. To ensure that South Africa is able to derive the full benefit of this and other partnerships, I have appointed Mr. Daniel Minele, a former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, as head of the Presidential Climate Finance Task Team to lead the mobilization of funds for our just transition. Now, properly managed, the energy transition will benefit all. Renewable energy production will make electricity cheaper and more dependable and will allow our industries to remain globally competitive as well. And in this regard, a number of our fairly sizable companies are already leading the way. And it's important that as government, we walk in tow with the innovations, the technological advances that they have already embraced. Investments in electric vehicles and hydrogen will equip South Africa to meet the global clean energy future. We will be able to expand our mining industry in strategic minerals that are crucial for clean energy, like platinum, vanadium, cobalt, copper, manganese, and lithium. We also have a unique opportunity in green hydrogen, given our world-class solar and wind resources and local technology and expertise. And all these measures, from the structural reforms to support our small, medium enterprises and investments in infrastructure and energy and emergency of new sectors, will drive a turnaround to economic growth driven, yes, by the private sector growth over the coming years. We know, however, that even with the best business environment and much faster rates of economic growth, it will take time for the private sector to create enough jobs for the millions of South Africans who need those jobs. Our intention is to make sure that as a nation we leave no one behind. That is why we are expanding public and social employment. The first two phases of the Presidential Employment Stimulus Programs, which we launched in October of 2020, have supported over 850,000 opportunities. More than 80% of the participants in these opportunities were young people, and over 60% of the participants were women. Now, that is an important development. And we were able to do this within a short space of time. Once we were hit by COVID, we gathered our wits around and decided that we needed to give protection to our people and to expand employment opportunities. This program has also supported young women like Tracy Nkosi from Springs, who was employed as an education assistant in Welgedag Primary School, and who says this opportunity has motivated her to further her studies in the educational sphere. She was brought in when we brought in assistants into our schools at the height of COVID, and we brought hundreds of thousands of them, and Tracy is one of those. And once arriving at the school to do what she thought would be menial work, she immediately found that she could do more important work, and now she wants to advance her studies and become an educator. It has also supported Umama Unosipho Tekwana from Mpendle in KwaZulu-Natal, who used her farming input voucher, which was part of this program, to buy maize, to buy manure, and supplements for her livestock. The total number of direct beneficiaries will soon rise to over 1 million South Africans with regards to the plan that we now have. This includes over 500,000 young people appointed as education assistants, making it the largest youth employment program ever undertaken in our history. The employment stimulus will also enable the Department of Home Affairs to recruit 10,000 unemployed young people for the digitization of paper records in the department, enhancing their skills and contributing. They will also be contributing to the modernization of citizen services. Now, these are young people that currently are unemployed that we will bring in. We would like to bring in more, but our fiscal position does not enable us to do so. The Social Employment Fund will create a further 50,000 work opportunities using the capability of organizations beyond government in areas such as urban agriculture, early childhood development, public art, and tackling gender-based violence. In addition to expanding public employment, we are providing support to young people to prepare them for the work and link them to opportunities in industries, to encourage hiring employment tax initiative. Now, this tax initiative has proven to be one of the most successful programs that we have put in place to bring in young people into the world of work. And invariably, the majority of them always find permanent employment once they are brought in through this program. We want to expand this so that more young people are brought into the world of work. For several years, this has been an effective way to encourage companies to hire new work seekers. The changes to the incentive will make it easier for small businesses in particular to hire young people. The Minister of Finance will announce the details of these changes in the budget. We call on companies to support this effort, to take up the incentive and give young people a place in the world of work. Announce the details of these changes in the budget. We call on companies to support this effort, to take up the incentive and give young people a place in the world of work. Hostel saved the $350 that he received for 9 months to start a fast food stall and to support his family. And as much as it has had a substantial impact, We must recognize that we face extreme fiscal constraints. A fiscal crisis would hurt the poor most of all through the deterioration of the basic services on which they rely. Mindful of the proven benefits of the grant, we will extend the 350 SRD grant for one further year to the end of March 2023. And we have been in deep consultations with a number of community-based organizations who have articulated very clearly to us the dire needs in our communities, but have also appreciated the challenged fiscal position that we are facing. And this is something that I am sure they will be able to appreciate. But we have also said we will continue conversations. We will continue conversations with them going forward. During this time, we will engage in broad consultations and detailed technical work to identify the best options to replace this grant. Any further support must pass the test of our own affordability and must not come at the expense of basic services or at the risk of unsustainable spending. It remains our ambition to establish a minimum level of support for those in greatest need. Expanding access to land is vital for our efforts to reduce hunger and to provide people with meaningful livelihoods. We are moving ahead with land reform in terms of our constitution and anticipate the approval of the expropriation bill during this year. The establishment of the Agriculture and Land Reform Development Agency will be finalized this year. The Department of Public Works and Infrastructure will finalize the transfer of 14,000 hectares of state land to the Housing Development Agency. We have enough arable land to support millions of thriving small-scale farmers in poultry, livestock, fruit, and vegetables. Now, through the Presidential Employment Stimulus and the Solidarity Fund, over 100,000 small-scale farmers have already received input vouchers to expand their production. This scheme has proven to be effective and impactful, and it has established a very good delivery mechanism that ensures that we are able to reach so many of the small-scale farmers. The agriculture sector has also recognized the importance of supporting these small-scale farmers and integration into their value chains. Now, through the Sugar Master Plan, the sugar industry has provided 225 million rand to over 12,000 small-scale farmers who are in the sugarcane industry as part of a 1 billion rand commitment to support black farmers. We will be expanding the provision of input vouchers and calling on all sectors to join this effort. I would like to see a situation where various sectors of agriculture, whether it is in the fruit sector, in the beef sector, in the sheep sector, and many other sectors, collectively helping in these sectors like the sugar cane industry has done. But on our part, we will collectively reach out to 250,000 small-scale farmers this year, expanding beyond the 100,000 that we reached last year. None of our efforts to revive our economy will succeed if we do not tackle the scourge of corruption once and for all. Since the beginning of the year, I've been provided with the first two parts of the report of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture headed by Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. While the definitive conclusion has yet to be delivered at the end of this month, the first two parts of the report make it plain that there was indeed state capture. This means that public institutions and state-owned enterprises were infiltrated by a criminal network intent on looting public money for private gain. The reports have detailed the devastating effects on these criminal activities on the SAA, Transnet, Denel, South African Revenue Service, and government communications. Now, state capture had a direct and very concrete negative impact on the lives of all South Africans, but especially the poorest and most vulnerable members of our society. It has weakened the ability of the state to deliver services and to meet the expectations and constitutional rights of our people. We must now do everything in our power to ensure that it never happens again. My responsibility is to ensure that the Commission report is properly and carefully considered and then acted upon. Now, by no later than June, I will present the plan of action in response to the Commission's recommendations. And I'll present it to you sitting right here. We will, as the Commission's first report recommends, strengthen the system to protect whistleblowers who are a vital safeguard in the fight against corruption and who take huge personal risk in reporting wrongdoing. We are doing a detailed review of all applicable legislation and a comparative study of other jurisdictions to strengthen whistleblower protection. The relevant law enforcement agencies are taking the necessary steps to address the immediate concern about the safety of whistleblowers. Now, many individuals and companies that the Commission has found were responsible for state capture must now be held accountable. I have every confidence that the National Prosecuting Authority will carry out the further investigations that the Commission has recommended, and that it will bring the members of the criminal network that infiltrated government and captured the state swiftly to justice. Now, the investigating directorate in the NPA is now poised to deliver on its crucial mandate, and a dedicated team has been established to pursue these cases. We will be appointing a new head of the investigating directorate following the departure of its head from that position. An amendment to the State Capture Commission regulations in June in 2020 empowered the sharing of information between the Commission and the law enforcement agencies. This amendment also permitted the employment of the State Capture Commission personnel by law enforcement agencies. Now, these empowering provisions have geared the investigating directorate to more effectively pursue the investigations emanating from the Commission. We have gratefully acknowledged the offer of support from the private sector to assist in providing those skills which we lack in government to enable investigation and prosecution of crime. To ensure that the prosecuting authority remains true to its constitutional obligation and mandate, and to ensure transparency, we are developing a framework for private sector cooperation that will be managed through the National Treasury. There are also discussions underway with the judiciary for the creation of special court roles for state capture and corruption cases. While we have taken decisive steps to end the era of state capture, we know that the fight against corruption is far from over. Even as the country was suffering from the devastation of COVID-19 pandemic, companies and individuals were conspiring with public officials to defraud government of billions of rands in COVID-19 related contracts. As soon as evidence emerged of this corruption, we acted. We withdrew certain emergency procurement regulations, set up a fusion center that brought together law enforcement agencies. We published the details of COVID-related contracts online and instituted the most extensive investigation that the Special Investigating Unit has ever undertaken since its formation. In December, the SIU submitted its final report on its investigation into COVID-related contracts. As a result, 45 matters with a combined value of 2.1 billion have been enrolled with the special tribunal. The SIU has referred 224 government officials for disciplinary action and has referred 386 cases for possible prosecution by the NPA. Now, we have set up, as the presidency, a monitoring mechanism of implementation on the recommendations of the SIU and to ensure that government departments and entities do act against those who have violated regulations and broken the law. The fight against corruption will take on a new intensity thanks to the outcome of the State Capture Commission, the strengthening of law enforcement agencies, and the implementation of new anti-corruption practices in the public service. State-owned enterprises play a vital role in our economy, from water and roads to energy and ports to defense and aviation. These strategic assets of our nation are necessary to keep our country running. It is essential that we reverse their decline and reposition them to contribute positively. We have therefore embarked on several immediate measures to restore these companies to health at the same time as we undertake far-reaching reforms that will make our SOEs more efficient, competitive, accountable, and sustainable. The Presidential SOE Council, which I appointed in 2020, has recommended that government adopt a centralized shareholding model for its key commercial state-owned companies. This would separate the state's ownership functions from its policy-making and regulatory functions, and to minimize the scope for political interference, introduce greater professionalism, and manage state assets in a way that protects shareholder value. Now, as part of this, preparatory work has begun for the establishment of a state-owned holding company to house strategic SOEs and to exercise coordinated shareholder oversight. To ensure that state-owned enterprises are effectively fulfilling their responsibility, the Council is preparing recommendations on state-owned enterprises to be retained, on which should be retained and which should be consolidated, and which do not serve the purpose of the public should be disposed of. Any recommendations would be subjected to extensive consultation with all stakeholders. We are taking steps to safeguard our democracy, to protect our economic infrastructure, and to build safer communities for all. Earlier this week, we released a report on the expert panel that I appointed into the civil unrest in July last year. The report paints a deeply disturbing picture of the capabilities of our security services and the structures that exist to coordinate their work. The report concludes that government's initial handling of the July 2021 events was inept, police operational planning was poor, there was poor coordination between the state security and intelligence services, and police are not always embedded in the communities that they serve. Now, the expert panel said that if violence has exposed anything, it was the poverty and inequality that is the root cause of the desperation of our people. The panel found that Cabinet must take overall responsibility for the events of July 2021. Now, this is a responsibility that we acknowledge and we also accept. We will, as recommended by the panel, develop and drive a national response to address the weaknesses that the panel identified. We will begin immediately by filling critical vacancies and addressing positions affected by suspensions in the State Security Agency and in crime intelligence. We will soon be announcing leadership changes in a number of security agencies to strengthen our security structures. Now, the staffing of the Public Order Policing Unit of the South African Police Service will be brought to an appropriate level with appropriate training in place as well. The ongoing damage to and theft of economic infrastructure has damaged confidence and severely constrained economic growth, investment, and job creation. At the same time, we need to confront the criminal gangs that invade construction sites and other business places to extort money from companies. This will require a focused and coordinated response. Government is therefore going to move ahead, and we've established specialized multidisciplinary units to address economic sabotage, extortion at construction sites, and vandalization of infrastructure. We will make resources available. We are going to make resources available to recruit and train an additional 12,000 new police personnel to ensure that the South African Police Service increases its capacity. Another area of immediate attention will be the re-establishment of community policing forums to improve relations and coordination between local police and residents of the areas they serve. It is clear from the observation of the expert panel that we need to take a more inclusive approach to assessing the threats to our country's security and determining the necessary responses. I'm calling on all South Africans through their various formations to participate as we go ahead to develop this whole process of a strategy. I will be approaching Parliament's presiding officers to request that Parliament plays a key role in facilitating inclusive process of consultation. The security services have been tasked by the National Security Council to urgently develop implementation plans that address the range of recommendations that have been put forward. Now, these measures will go a long way to address the serious concerns about the breakdown of law and order in society. This year, we are intensifying the fight against gender-based violence and femicide through the implementation of a strategic plan, and also taking other measures to promote the empowerment of women. Earlier this month, I signed into law the 3 pieces of legislation which you passed, which has strengthened the criminal justice system, that also promotes accountability across the state and also supporting survivors. Now, the implementation of this legislation will definitely go a long way to ensuring that cases are successfully prosecuted, that survivors of gender-based violence are protected, and that there are there's more effective deterrence in place. We have made significant progress in reducing the DNA backlog processing, reducing it from 210,000 exhibits to some 58,000 at present. However, the fight against gender-based violence will never be won unless, as a society, we mobilize all formations and all citizens behind a sustained program of social action. As the COVID-19 pandemic has starkly demonstrated, a nation's health is directly linked with economic progress and social development. We will continue with the work underway to ensure universal health coverage for everyone in South Africa, regardless of their ability to pay for medical services or not. While public hearings on the NHI bill are continuing in Parliament, much progress is being made in preparing for the introduction of the NHI. More than 59 million people are registered on the health patient registration system. By September 2021, more than 56,000 additional health workers had been recruited and more than 46,000 community health workers integrated into the public health system. For the last 2 years, the education of our children and young people has been severely disrupted. As we return to normal educational activity, we will work harder to ensure that all learners and students get the quality education that they need and deserve. Government must work for the people. That is why our foremost priority is to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. We will soon be finalizing a framework for the professionalization of the public service. This will include tighter measures for recruitment of public servants, continuous professional development through the National School of Government, and partnerships between state bodies, professional associations, and universities. We will continue with various processes to ensure that we strengthen the public service. And in this regard, we will ensure that the public service who are going to be holding their important strategic conference later is able to address the challenges that our people face. This year, we will continue with the implementation of the district development model. This model brings all three spheres of government together with other social partners in every district to grow inclusive local economies and to improve the lives of our citizens. In particular, the DDM, as we call it, facilitates integrated planning and budgeting across spheres of government and improves integration of national projects at district and local level. While there are many parts of the state that require much work, there are institutions that continue to serve the people of this country effectively and efficiently. One such institution is the South African Revenue Service, which will be turning 25 years this year. While SARS was badly damaged by state capture, and it has made remarkable progress in restoring its integrity, its credibility, and its performance. Since its formation, SARS has collected some 16 trillion rand for the country's social and economic development. This revenue has enabled government to improve the lives of millions of South Africans through the provision of healthcare, education, social grants, and other basic services. A capable state is not only about the quality of public servants, but it is also about the efficiency of its institutions. It is also fundamentally about how citizens are empowered to participate. We must work together to ensure that platforms like school governing bodies, community policing forums are more active and more inclusive. A vibrant civil society operating at all levels, but more especially at local level and local government level, which we intend to strengthen, is crucial for a capable state and for development. We will therefore be working with our social partners to convene the long-awaited Social Sector Summit, and this summit will seek to improve the interface between the state and civil society and address the challenges that NGOs and community-based organizations face. Our country has suffered damaging blows in recent times. A confluence of forces, many of them from outside of our control, has brought us to where we are now. We face steep and daunting challenges. Indeed, we are engaged in a battle for the soul of this country, but there can be no doubt that we will succeed. We will emerge victorious in all these challenges that we face. We will never be defeated. And you know why? Because the spirit of resilience is deeply embedded in our DNA as South Africans. So I ask every South African to rally together, whether we agree with each other on certain issues or not, but there is a lot that binds us together. I ask all of us to rally together, to fight against corruption, to also be involved collectively in our fight to create jobs, in our fight to achieve a more just and equal society. We have faced many crises in our past, and we have always overcome them. We have been confronted with difficult choices, and we have made those choices. In trying times, we have shown courage and resilience. Time and time again, we have pulled ourselves back from the brink of disaster and inspired hope, renewal, and progress. And we must do so again, now as we face these many challenges. I call upon all of us to forge this new consensus. And this consensus should not only be privy to government, business, labor, and communities. It should also be a consensus in which all of us join in, so that we can confront a new reality, a consensus that unites us behind our shared determination to reform our economy and to rebuild our institution. If there ever was a time when we should work together, this is the time for us to work together. So let us go ahead and work together instead of some of us tearing this country apart. Instead of some of us tearing our democracy apart. This is the time for us to work together, and let us together build our country. But more importantly for me, this is the time, with all the economic measures that we've announced, as well as the other social protection measures that we've put forward. This is the time to leave no one behind. We must all move together as one, as South Africans. I thank you.
Man, you talk about President, you must come back.
Thank you very much, honorable members. I now take this opportunity to thank the honorable president for his address. Please note that after I've adjourned the joint sitting, members who are in the chamber should remain in their places until the procession has left the chamber. The procession, led by the acting sergeant at arms and the usher of the Black Rod, will leave the chamber in the following order: the Speaker of the National Assembly, the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, the President, and then the Acting Secretary to Parliament. In addition, the Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces will also follow, the Deputy President will follow, and the Acting Secretary to Parliament, as was indicated earlier. That, honorable members, concludes the business for the day, and the joint sitting is now adjourned.
South Africa needs a new consensus. That was the main theme of the State of the Nation Address 2022. 1 hour and 50 minutes, Konita Hunter. One of the longest SONA speeches we've had in a number of years by President Ramaphosa, with a very, very clear focus, Carol Payton, on the economy. Carol was sitting here ferociously taking notes for almost 3/4 of the speech. It was a solid focus on the economy. We're going to analyze some of the top statements from President Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address. My name is still Adjournment, Editor-in-Chief of News24. I'm still joined by Konita Hunter, our politics editor, and Carol Payton, our writer-at-large on Fin24. If I can just go through some of the highlights, colleagues, that I highlighted here in yellow on my computer. South Africa needs a new consensus. The state must create an environment in which the private sector can drive the economy. Carol, a massive focus tonight on the fact that it's business and the private sector that must create jobs. The president quoted a figure of, I think, 80% of all jobs are created by the private sector and not the state. That was met with some interesting reactions from parliamentarians. We also heard tonight that a macroeconomic framework is at the center of his plans. There's a new Electricity Regulations Act which opens up electricity provision and essentially, I think, does away with Eskom's monopoly, but we'll ask you to analyze that for us almost soon. New Transnet spaces for the private sector to conduct their own freight rail lines from Durban to Johannesburg. The ICASA Spectrum auction in 3 weeks from now, a water agency in which the private sector will be involved. A cannabis and hemp plan for specifically the Eastern Cape and KZN. And the president looked very excited about this and mentioned the high levels of productivity that can come from that. And then I thought a very interesting appointment of Sipho Nkosi, the former mining executive, CEO of Exara Resources, to head up the red tape team in the presidency, Carol, to cut red tape for business. Some announcements as well made about job creations under something called the Social Employment Fund, the extension of the 350 Rand Social Relief Fund for another year. And we earlier spoke to Carol about how that may just morph into a basic income grant, although those words were not used in the speech tonight, I thought very carefully by the president. And that was the economic State of the Nation address. Carol, were you surprised?
I was surprised in that he went into such detail. That was surprising for me. Look, the thing is that we do get stuck in thinking that, everything is bad and the economy is not growing and nothing is happening. And it does make an impact when the president comes out and says, well, look, actually, it's, he named a lot of areas in which there was going to be change: water, electricity, ports, rail, broadband. All of those 5 areas, I mean, we've been talking about them for years and years and years, that those 5 areas is what's blocking up economic growth. It's what's stopping economic growth. It's a real drag on productivity. So we know these things, but I think he took, I think all of them, he took a little bit further. Each one went a little bit further. And yes, a lot of them could have happened sooner, if we want to be critical. Lots of these things should have happened, 3 years ago. But here we are, they're happening now. The Electricity Regulation Act, that's significant because it opens the way for private players to start selling between one another. So you might not have to necessarily buy your electricity from Eskom all the time. You might be able to buy it from the farmer next door who's got some excess or whatever. But obviously to do that, you need to use Eskom's transmission grid. So that's the other part of that act, is to say, of that proposed reform, is to say, let's have a really independent transmission operator, grid operator, which regulates this. And so there's a level playing field. Everybody can sell on equal terms.
Is it fair to call this a business-friendly SONA address?
Yeah, no, it's very business friendly. I think it was great. I mean, you know, when he said it's business that creates job, not government. As obvious that is to many people, it's definitely not obvious in a party like the ANC, where the belief is that it's the state that leads development. And what we've seen the ANC talking about this developmental state for years and years and years, and what we've actually seen is a really weak state that can't lead, even it can't deliver basic things, never mind lead growth. So that's important, and as you say, there was a bit of rumblings when he said that. It was difficult to know who was rumbling.
If it was the EFF or the ANC or
yeah,
both.
exactly. We didn't really quite know who was rumbling, but very important point to be made, and I hope it gets made more often.
Carol, before I move to you, Quinita, this red tape team headed by Sipho Nkosi, that sounds. Do you think that's important and could be impactful?
It's so important. You know, I mean, the Western Cape government has had a really successful red tape cutting project where they actually go out and get stuff that's stuck in the port and get it out of the port because there's some silly red tape stopping it. So very important. But you know, we have been, I know the first time this was mentioned, this red tape thing was mentioned was when Thabo Mbeki was president. So we have, you know, it's been like, yes, we need to cut red tape, but we never have. And then at the same time, you have got a ruling party which loves red tape. You know, they love more red tape. That's actually what they never want to just achieve one thing with a project. They always want to pile on some other objectives, and that all adds red tape. So Sipho Nkosi, yeah, great choice, you know, fantastic. It's great that the president is drawing on these really accomplished business people, and hopefully he'll make a difference.
Can I just get in there, Carol? There seems to be the centralization in the presidency, where the president is really beefing up people who work at the union buildings, and he's attracting, you know, strong minds from his party and from the private sector, which is not something that we were used to see before. You had Ramaphosa in the infrastructure, you know, to head up infrastructure. You have and there's almost sort of a focus on bringing everything into the presidency so he can sort of keep an eye on it. I'm just wondering the perils of this, because at the end of the day, you can appoint Sipho Nkosi, or you can appoint Daniel Minile, people who come from really, really rich backgrounds in the private sector and other spaces, but then they still have to work with the government departments who actually don't care. And so for me, it's sort of, you know, it's well intended, but at the end of the day, how does an appointment of one person translate into turning a culture of, like you said, where we have this institutionalized red tape, where red tape, you know, justifies job creation in those spaces, and patronage networks in other spaces. Yeah. And so that's why I wonder, what, you know, I understand that the noble intention of bringing in these skills to government, and then the other thing is you're creating almost parallel government departments in your presidency, almost duplicating work in the form of task teams and in the form of you know, these experts that come in. So at the end of the day, yes, it's great appointments, but how much of it actually translates to outcomes? Maybe
the professionalization of the civil service starts in the presidency, and the president hopes it filters from it.
Yeah, I do think it's a bit of an admission that, well, government isn't working. So let's bring in, because, you know, the Department of Trade and Industry should be championing the fact that there's too much red tape. They don't. They add to it all the time. So yeah, it is a substitute for a government that works, but our government isn't working at the moment.
Quinita, I want to ask you politically, in the ANC tonight, how will this speech be perceived? Very business friendly, very much we must do as government, all we must do is to make sure that business can thrive, because they're going to create the jobs. Yes, we're going to add a few thousand here with a water project and a rail project, but the big stuff's going to happen in private sector. And how do you interpret this term, the new consensus? Because the president obviously thought long about what he's going to call. I think you called it, you said it's going to be something of a pact or something tonight. So it's called now the new consensus.
Yeah.
So who must consent to what? You know, consensus implies, I guess, that not everyone really agrees, but we consent on this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's this vision of like we need to have a new path for South Africa, and you need to bring government and you need to bring labor, civil society in the next 100 days come together, put together this plan of what we all agree should be the future of South Africa. Now, South Africa is not short of plans. We had a very wonderful national development plan. We have had many of Ramaphosa's iterations of it, and I understand his motivation of getting everyone on board so that you can all work towards moving the country in the same direction. It's important. I'm not in any way cynical about that, but I do think that, as Carol said offline, is that when government has to practically lead the way, and so we've not seen that. So you can have a social compact in paper, but what happens in terms of government actually showing up to the party? And that's why it was very important what he was saying about jobs. For the longest time, there was this thing that we can make business unfriendly decisions. We can mess over the economy if you like, and then we will promise these jobs within government and these EPW, what is it, these temporary municipal jobs and laud the outcomes of that. But now there's a real realization that the state cannot deal with this massive unemployment issue. And so if you ask me, people in the ANC, I mean, this is a business-friendly speech, and you're going to hear mumblings. If you want to talk about ANC factionism, I know that this speech is going to evoke the whole rumblings of appeasing neoliberal capital and that kind of thing. And you already see that kind of narrative that is persisting. The reality of it is that he had no way out of it. Again, like Carol said, he went a bit further this time. He went very specific into detail, and I think that it was important, even though many of the points that he made may have gone over the ordinary viewer's head in relation to the trains, in relation to the ports. But I think that it was very detailed to show that he has a comprehensive plan, multifaceted as well, and also to show that there has been some groundwork done, and we're building on this groundwork. And I think that this is not to say that completely a job well done, but it's also to appreciate that he was coming from an environment with the basics, the bare minimum was not done, and so that's why he had to talk about spectrum and
he put dates on it this time,
and
I
he
must
has put
say,
dates on
because
it.
a lot of it is things we've heard before, let's be honest, but I mean, Spectrum in 3 weeks, we'll hold him to that. The trains opening up of transit in April this year. Carol Payton, I want to come back to you on the basic income grant. Are you surprised that we didn't hear a more firm commitment to that tonight and just an extension of the 350 Rand?
No, not at all. Not at all surprised. And actually, I think that the president really put it well. So there are these fears, especially in the markets, that he's going to be under pressure to commit, and he's going to commit to something the country can't really afford, and it's going to land us in trouble further down the line. And he didn't do that, but he did say, we do want to be a society that doesn't leave anyone behind. And I think most people, many people in South Africa would agree that that's the kind of country we do want to be. But I wasn't surprised, and I think the fact that he gave it a 12-month extension is significant, because sort of in the inner kind of inner circle discussions and in the discussions that are going on in government, the aim is to have some sort of indication by October medium-term budget statement to say, like, yeah, we're doing this, yeah, we aren't, and this is how we think we've got to fund it, and only to introduce it in April 2023, if it's going to be introduced. So that wasn't surprising, but it does show that he's trying to signal we're going to be careful, we're going to do this properly, we understand our situation, and he also, we know he's partial to public employment programs, so he threw some of those in as well, which I think is good, and the youth tax incentive as well. Those are the sorts of things you actually really do need on a big scale to help business create jobs, because that's what helped business grow.
Kunita, just moving away from the economy for a moment, criminal justice system, corruption. We heard the president say that he will report by June latest on the Zondo report. with a clear plan of action in response to the Commission's recommendation. So again, committing himself to a date.
He's made that date before.
Yeah.
He said it when the report was released that he's not going to make any commitment before this. Obviously, people were quite annoyed by that because, I mean, you have to report, say something. But what he was saying about whistleblowers,
Yes.
he kind of put his neck out in relation to that, saying that there's going to be this review of legislation and a comparative study to other jurisdictions to strengthen whistleblower protection, and also calling on law enforcement to say they must immediately deal with this issue. We obviously know that the SONA Commission report flagged this to say the people who have come forward and blew the whistle on state capture are suffering the consequences of it, and that's absolutely horrendous for a country, especially now as we're trying to undo the effects of state capture.
That may come as a bit of cold comfort for the likes of Athol Williams, who had to move himself out of the country.
Absolutely. But then there's obviously the finger pointing at the National Prosecuting Authority, AB, in terms of what are they going to do, because a lot of that report is points to them. The president showing a lot of confidence in the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batoyi. He's also committed himself to appointing a new head of the investigative directorate. He didn't give a time frame for that.
And he didn't say why him had left.
We would love to hold him to a date, especially because that's such a crucial entity that needs to have a new head. And then also talking about the State Capture Commission in relation to acknowledging that yes, there was state capture. And I know that sounds bizarre to many of us who've been writing about this for a long time, but there are circles within the ANC that had this level of this kind of cynicism towards the concept of state capture, as if did it actually happen, and the people like Jacob Zuma and his supporters that would deny that state capture actually happened. So for the president to say that gives you a good indication that we all now on the same terms. It's now official. There was state capture. Rogue elements, corrupt elements, criminals infiltrated the state and benefited from it, and so now there must be the consequence part that comes afterwards.
Just two more important things that caught my eye that I've made notes here was the leadership changes.
Yes.
He emphasized the plural changes in security agencies. So we spoke earlier today about the sword hanging over the head of Kekla Sithole at the police. We spoke about the acting appointments at the SSA. So hopefully those and others are some of those that he referred to, and see some of those positions again. Again, something he could have done earlier. And then, Juanita, I mean, your immediate field of expertise, he took responsibility for the July riots, if I heard him correctly. He said the report, the Sandy Africa report, apportioned blame in the executive, and we accept that.
Yeah. So I mean, this is something President Ramaphosa is very good at, right? He will tell you the house is burning, and he'll say, yes, we may have, had a role to play. The reality of it is that how do you take responsibility for it? And I think the changes in the top echelons of the security cluster is very important. He needs to appoint a Director General of Intelligence. He needs to appoint the head of domestic intelligence. That's very important. He needs to stabilize crime intelligence. The back and forth in relation to, I mean, these are quick appointments that can be made. These are not lengthy processes. Then he needs to make a decision, like we said earlier, around Kekla Sithole. These are big things the president directly can just, put a signature on, instruct the minister to institute a process and appoint these people. And the thing about the July unrest is that he regurgitated what the report said, which was important. But I do think that he needs to take ownership of it, and he needs to now say, because when he released the report, he said, we're going to announce real action. And so just saying, okay, we're now going to just sort of make some changes, I don't think it's significant, but I do think coming from where we're coming from, where there was no acknowledgement around the role of government and cabinet at the center of this devastating unrest that was unprecedented in our democratic dispensation, I think that it was a very good first step. It can't be the only step.
But we need those arrests and prosecutions. Carol Payton, Juanita Hunter, thank you very, very much for joining me tonight. We are going to deep in ourselves into the speech now. By the way, for our readers' benefits, we did not receive the full speech until right at the end. So we're going to sit and read it again now with a red pen and provide some more analysis and insights on News24 tonight and tomorrow morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night. Goodbye.